household decline in the town of Chatham from 2010 to 2017. So over this 7-year period, the town of Chatham saw a decline of households with, think of homes with year-round, family residences, declining by 11% over that short period of time in Chatham. And in Harwich, the percentage decline was 3.7% decline. And so you might wonder, okay, well, how does this relate to school budgets? One of the big drivers behind this budget is changing enrollments. And the reality is, in our towns with declining households, so that means that if you have a house that goes up for sale and you have people that buy it and it becomes a summer home and it's not a home that has potentially kids that might come to our schools, or it gets purchased and becomes a rental property, again, seasonal rental that likely doesn't have children of school age in it. Just that in and of itself starts to create a situation where you have one child, 2 children less per year, happening in the Chatham side, and that same thing happening on the Harwich side, but it's just happening at a slower rate. And just big picture, how this is impacting our schools. 3 years ago, we started by shutting down one kindergarten section at Chatham Elementary, going from 3 sections of kindergarten to 2 sections of kindergarten. One of the things that's behind this budget is we barely had enough kids to have 6 sections of kindergarten of Harwich Elementary School this year, and we see a contraction to 5 sections of kindergarten at Harwich Elementary School this year, and having the 5 sections of first grade. So so we're seeing this slow decline in the number of children coming into the system at those early ages, and that tends to be driving a lot of what's behind the budget as we go through this presentation. So there are some really great news when it comes to the regional school district. There's a slide that we present that looks at school choice coming into the district, and the number of families wanting to come in here and have their children come here is going up. The number of kids heading out to charter school from our 2 towns is going down. The number of kids heading out from our 2 towns to school choice placements at Nauset or DY is going down. And despite choice out, down, charter school out, down, school choice in, up, we're still seeing an enrollment decline. And that, there are things that both of our towns have to kind of think about. How do we encourage families to be in our communities to at least nullify the decline in school-age children in our communities. If it doesn't change, then we'll continue to be in this situation where we have to slowly contract and slowly contract. So that's sort of how I started conversations last night in Chatham, and I'll kind of loop back to that on how that starts to play in to various places in this budget. When we've talked before, when the budget season was starting up, a concern that we raised with our town managers and finance directors is that we knew that there was going to be a line item in the FY20 budget that was going to increase significantly over previous years, and that's because we are seeing a few additional out-of-district students that are causing a $432,000 increase in one line item of the budget. So we were concerned that this out-of-district line item for children with intensive special needs was going to create a significant budget challenge. We went and had a breath of relief for a day because the health insurance premiums for Cape Cod Municipal Health Group came in with a 0% increase for active employees. Budgetarily, that seemed to nullify the challenge of these expensive out-of-district placements. only to have literally the following day, the governor release his numbers, which indicate how much state aid will be coming to Monomoy, but also indicating what the minimum required contributions are between the two towns. So this is a budget that all in, including the expensive out-of-district placements, is a 3% budget increase. If you leave that one unavoidable line item out, the other lines in the budget are increasing by total 1.96%. It's a reduced staff budget with a reduction of staffing that's mirroring a decline in enrollment that we've seen over the past 3 years. We have health insurance is included in this. We've got the placeholder for working with the Cape Cod Collaborative on bus contracts with them. We have a placeholder in this budget for a successful contract negotiations, and I know the school committee will be doing a vote on that, and we'll share the results here in another hour. So there are things that are helping keep that budget below a 2% outside of that out-of-district line. But a big factor behind this budget is just declining enrollments. We've seen in just the number of students from Chatham, as of October 1, this school year, we saw over a 30 student decline in Chatham. And that's not Chatham children heading out to charter schools or out to school choice. It's a decline in foundation enrollment. So it's a decline in the number of students that walked across the stage last June at a graduation versus the number of children that came in to kindergarten. So we're seeing 12 years later a significant decrease in the number of children. And on the Harwich side of our union here, we've seen about an 11 student increase in the foundation enrollment, which is the number of students that are heading to public schools that this school district is supporting. So again, we're seeing actually more students from Harwich coming in at kindergarten than walked across the stage at graduation last year. So so good news in terms of the town of Harwich that way, that there's support there. There's young families, families with kids there in Harwich, and that's a challenge. So it's like this tale of the two towns. As I was speaking before the boards in Chatham, it was okay. Well, what can we do, school side, town side, to support more families coming in, because you're facing a challenge that Harwich isn't seeing as much. Harwich isn't seeing, at least in the last few years, a decline in the foundation enrollment, which is a decline in school-age children. So behind a budget, one of the big factors is state aid. The governor this year increased the amount of state aid that comes to school districts. I think more urban areas saw more of an increase in state aid, so the trajectory of the state aid line went up for FY20. Monomoy's trajectory didn't go, didn't see an upward slope. So while we see more state aid, we're not seeing it increase at the rates that some communities across Massachusetts did. As I mentioned, the minimum contribution is swinging up gradually over the last couple years towards Harwich, slowly dropping off on Chatham's side. When we calculate an assessment or the bill to run the school district between the two towns, they use a 3-year rolling average. They smooth out how enrollment changes year to year impact towns. But when the state calculates when the state calculates the minimum required contribution, it's based on an instantaneous how many kids are in the foundation enrollment from Chatham in October 1, 2000, in this case, for FY20, they would look at October 1, 2018, how many kids from Chatham were in public schools, either in Monomoy or charter schools or school choice to another district, because all of those children we're responsible for as a district. And as you see there, the green bars are the foundation enrollment. There was a significant drop in the number of children in Chatham, and that significant drop is paralleled by the drop in the minimum required contribution. Whereas if we look at what's happening to foundation enrollment and the minimum required contribution in Harwich, the number of children in Harwich, FY17 over to 18, 19, and 20, we've seen a slow increase in the number of children in Harwich. Again, globally speaking across Cape Cod, many towns would be good problem to have. It's more kids. Challenge is more kids means that there's a greater requirement that the state places on the town to fund children. To fund children in the schools. Another factor that goes behind foundation enrollment are wealth factors, just revenues that the towns are taking in, and for both of our communities. The revenue picture has been quite good in the last couple of years. So behind these numbers are positive revenue growth, which again is factoring into the state saying, well, you've had strong revenue growth, you need to support your schools. So guidelines and assumptions. As we were putting together this budget, we were sensitive to making sure that we were advancing some of the things that we outlined in the strategic plan that in that process that we started this fall, and the strategic plan that the school committee adopted this winter. We're also sensitive to make sure that our class sizes at the elementary level, ever since I've been here, we've talked about keeping class sizes averaged across grade levels at 18 plus or minus 1 at the elementary level, 19 plus or minus 2 at the middle school and high school level. And we also try to make sure that whatever we're putting forward for a budget complements the fiscal circumstances of both Harwich and Chatham. In terms of budget assumptions, as I said, there has been a decline since FY16 in Monomoy's enrollment, and we try to mirror the decline in enrollment with some adjustment to staffing. So there's an overall 8.5 reduction in staff, with that about three teachers and the others being support staff. As I said, the governor's numbers came out in January. Governor's numbers aren't the final say. So the governor's numbers go through a process over the next couple months, and as we get into town meeting, these will tend to shift. But my experiences have been, you'll find that maybe regional transportation aid will increase, but it's one pot of money, so something else tends to decrease. So at the end of the day, while we might see some things, some areas of some aid coming from the state increase in some areas, it's oftentimes offset in other places within the budget. So more regional transportation might mean less circuit breaker or less charter school reimbursement. So generally, when the governor's numbers come out, it gives you a pretty good feel for what your total support is going to come from the state. When the governor's numbers come out, that's when the minimum required contributions come out, and those tend to be rather fixed. The other thing that plays into an assessment is we have a 3-year rolling average, and that has shifted slightly towards Harwich by 0.2% in this budget. So Harwich's operations assessment is 73.45%. Chatham's is 26.55%. There is a commitment behind this budget to support OPEB, which is it's called the Outstanding Post-Employment Benefits, to support OPEB by $100,000, which is what the district has been doing for the past several years. We also, in this budget, have a commitment to support $50,000 towards stabilization in case we have a big repair that needs to be done in any of the schools within a fiscal year. District enrollment. So district enrollment, these would be students' seats in classrooms. We're 65% Harwich, 22% Chatham, 13% school choice in terms of the children that are attending our schools. The district enrollment trend, as I said, has dropped off from FY16 to the present year. We've seen a drop of about 58 students. We anticipate going into next school year that we're going to see an increase at the middle school level. So we currently have a bubble that's in sort of the 4th grade to 6th grade range within the school district, a bubble of students. That's going to move up further into the middle school. When that bubble reaches, if we kind of project forward another 4 years, this high school is going to be running at capacity. The building was built for a capacity of 700 students, and we'll see it jump up quite quickly over the next couple of years. We went from, 620 students last year to 650, is that right, Bill, this year? 660, right? So we're seeing the number of students here, and we'll be pushing 700 as we get into the next couple of years and actually go briefly a little over 700. So, but the challenge is, while we're seeing an increase at the middle school that will slowly make its way up to the high school, what's happening at the elementary level is we're seeing a continual decline in the number of students there. Again, loops back to sort of the bigger issues that our towns are facing. Challenges that we are seeing fewer and fewer families in our towns, primarily fewer families in Chatham, which then has budgetary impacts. As I mentioned, it's a reduced staff budget. Overall, there's a reduction behind this budget of 8.5 staff. Anticipated class sizes at the elementary school. We anticipate at Chatham Elementary there will be grade levels that have class sizes running at 14 up to 21. And at Harwich Elementary, we anticipate that we'll have class sizes, grade levels that would be in the 16 up to 20.5. Just for clarification, some people look at 21, say while a large number, globally speaking, 21 is still a rather small elementary school classroom. If you look at Massachusetts as a whole, Chatham Elementary twice over the past 7 years has had classrooms at that level. Harwich Elementary has been at or above that level 5 over the last 7 years. Middle school, 16 to 18 would be our anticipated class sizes at the high school. 8th grade core academic subjects around 16. Core academic subjects in 9 through 12, depending on the department, 15 to 18. That doesn't mean that we won't see class sizes anywhere over 18. As Bill puts together the schedule at the high school, there's going to be some classes that will end up having to go the way a high school schedule gets put together into the mid-20s, but you'll also have other classrooms on the other side of that as the schedule gets put together that are going to be significantly less than 15, but it just depends on what kids are signing up for as you go through a high school scheduling process. Out-of-district special education, we've seen the out-of-district numbers over the last years range from anywhere from up from 11 to 19. We'll see this go up by 2 as we go into FY20. And here's the graph that really speaks to some of the positive trends. If you look 18 to 19 at Monomoy, a school choice coming into Monomoy, going up. Families want to be here. It's a great program. Families choicing out. We're seeing fewer families choosing other school districts, and we continue to see the charter school out slowly decrease. Behind a budget are some accounts that the school district uses. One of the major drivers behind a budget is how much of the excess and deficiency do you use. For those that are familiar with townside government, on townside, excess and deficiency would equate to the town's free cash. So you could use free cash to buffer or offset a fiscal year's budget. Under state statutes, regional school districts cannot have a excess and deficiency beyond 5% of their overall budget. When we started the regional school district, we had, as a new school district, a reserve or excess and deficiency reserves of 0. And Katie and I spoke with the school committee and thoughtfully wanted to get up to 4% of our total budget within 7 years, to build a reserve to help us and our towns smooth out budgets, 1 year to the next. We were able to get to 5% actually in 5 years, and at 5%, the state doesn't allow you to have more than 5%. So you can't go beyond that number. You have to sort of go from your excess and deficiency. So we were getting up there last year, so we felt we could use more of the excess and deficiency to help reduce the bills, the assessment to the two towns in FY19. But I also shared with the selectmen and the finance committees last year that the school district cannot, year after year after year, take $705,000 out of its reserves. Within just a couple of years, there would be no reserves left, and suddenly both towns would be in a situation of having to offset this lack of $700,000 of funding to help offset a budget. So this year, we are only using $550,000 of excess and deficiency to offset the FY20 budget. So this, again, will come in the last couple slides of the presentation is where excess and deficiency sort of comes into the financial calculations. School choice. The way the school district operates is we have students from other towns that choose to come to our school district. Their school districts pay $5,000 a piece for each of those children. If they have special education needs, there's a small amount that gets added on to the $5,000 to offset the additional costs, their additional special education costs. So the school district takes in $1.3 million in school choice tuitions from other communities. And we use these tuitions to help offset a portion of our staffing costs. So if you can think of it, we've got kids coming in, we're paying for some teacher salaries for those students. So we offset the budget by $1.259 million to defray some of the staffing costs. And there still is a reserve in that line. So there's a $484,000 reserve in the school choice line. It's an important place to have a reserve because I think I mentioned we will be reducing Harwich Elementary from 6 classrooms of kindergarten to 5. But what if we have good fortune in Harwich, all of a sudden a whole bunch of kindergartners materialize and we need 6 classrooms? This is a place that the school district could go to put in that 6th teacher if they find themselves, after the budget's been put together, say, okay, we need to make sure that we can have that classroom or kindergarten classroom back. But again, it's a reserve to go to, not something to just use without great thought. Circuit breaker. When you have expensive out-of-district placements, the state reimburses school districts a portion of those out-of-district costs. We anticipate that we'll be getting $191,000 from the state in circuit breaker monies, and we use $191,000 in this budget to help defray the cost of these expensive out-of-district placements. There's still a reserve in that account, and again, an important thing to have, because if you have a child who mid-year comes into your district or needs some sort of out-of-district placement, there's a place that we can go to help fund it in the middle of a fiscal year. All right, here's a big driver behind this budget. These are tuitions out. The top line, $1.2 million flows out of Monomoy's budget to other school districts, to Nauset or to DY or other school districts for school choice students out. So we see 1.3 million in school choice tuitions coming in. We see 1.2 million in school choice tuitions going out. We're one of the few school districts on the Cape, or actually one of only 2 school districts on the Cape, where that's a positive cash flow in our favor. Where it starts to go negative fast is when you have students that head out to charter schools, they take with them more than the $5,000 that you see moving for school choice. You see them taking the entire per pupil expense, which is almost $16,000 is flowing out with each child to a charter school. So again, if we look at things that are really important to Monomoy, making sure we've got the best middle school on Cape Cod makes families look twice about Lighthouse Charter School. Making sure we've got the best high school on Cape Cod has families look twice relative to Sturgis. In terms of budget drivers, we have a placeholder in this budget to accommodate what we anticipate would be the contractual obligations with a fully ratified contract for all of our different union groups. As I said, we know that we have the line for out-of-district special education placements for these students with extreme special needs. While I said that health insurance went up by 0% for active employees, the retiree health insurance actually went up by 3.7%. So again, $35,000 relative to some past years is a savings. We have a placeholder because this is a reduced staff budget. We have a placeholder for unemployment expenses that's in that that's built into the budget. Our Barnstable retirement goes up a little bit. We see a health grant for our nurses ends, and we have us picking up the staffing costs for $37,981 there. We have a placeholder for the new transportation contract of $157,000. Again, it's a placeholder, and we anticipate as we get further into developing a memorandum of understanding with the Cape Cod Collaborative, we actually hope to see that number come down. And then finally, the high school construction project has been closed out, and in the process of closing out, there's a small amount of money that you needed to go and deal with borrowing. We initially thought it was going to be much greater, ends up being a smaller amount, and working with the finance directors in the 2 towns, they felt that the best way to deal with a small amount of money was to get what's called a State House note. So we do a 3-year State House note, and year 1 of that State House note finds us having an additional $56,780 in borrowing costs. In past years, I've talked about some initiatives that we are continuing within the budget, and then I have talked about strategic initiatives that we're launching in a particular year. So one of the things that we started last year was to take money that was in the budget for our webmaster, paired that with money for a community engagement coordinator in our budget presentations, and we're going to be using that community engagement role to move forward a number of initiatives that are behind the strategic plan, and there's a lot within that strategic plan of developing community partnerships. I thought Joy has done a nice job this year, both at helping spearhead the strategic planning community forum that we had this fall, but she's also been working with the schools to do a better job of bringing in volunteers, logging the hours, and then more recently to launching our National Honor Society at the high school to have them work with middle school students before school, and in the last couple of weeks to start pairing mentors that we've trained with student mentees to really tap into the retirees in our community and to pair them with students who could use another supportive adult in their lives. We also, last year, started to focus on the English language arts curriculum at our elementary schools. We had, in the previous budget year, launched the Math and Focus program in the district. Now it's time to go and focus on the English language arts. So there's money in this budget to support more guided reading material at the elementary school. In terms of strategic improvements that we are looking at in this budget, we have looked at in this budget moving from a Spanish special at the elementary level to a science and engineering special. In order to do that and to have our program align with the Massachusetts Science and Technology curricular frameworks, we need to go and provide money within our budget to have more science materials at both Harwich Elementary School and Chatham Elementary School, so there's lines in there. I mentioned that the middle school population is going to be, or middle school enrollment is going to be increasing. We have a placeholder here to increase the clinical supports and the special education through the team chair at the middle school. At the high school end, we have, we've been talking at our various forums that we are seeing in our community a greater and greater number of English language learners. And particularly at the high school, we've got kids that would be showing up here, from, let's say, from Brazil or from Jamaica, coming in without a lot of formal education, in, let's say, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, and we have to have them ready for state exams. So there's a lot of supports that we need to provide to help make up for some lost formal education on the backside, but also to help them grasp some of the material that they're getting in English within each of their classes. So we add in this budget a teacher at the high school for English language learners. On that same theme, we also have, for the first time in the Monomoy budget, a line item for translation and interpreter services. Again, if we want to better connect with our families, we need to really make sure that we're connecting with them in their native tongue. And we have, again, a growing number of families that speak languages other than English at home, and we need to engage interpreter services for that. There are also a number of initiatives with the teachers behind the strategic plan that we want to move forward, everything from differentiated to guided reading to helping teachers with their social emotional repertoire. But all of those initiatives need time to bring teachers in during summer workshops to again give us the time to help them in their professional development. So there's additional funding in this budget for that. The draft budget in detail, ultimately when the school committee votes the budget, they vote it by line item, and these are the lines that they vote behind. Ultimately this is a $40,901,481 budget. There are $305,000 behind this budget to support maintenance and upkeep in all of our school buildings. One of the things that we're really proud of is that the middle school and the elementary school today are in better shape than when we came together as a school district, and it's important for us to go and keep them that way and protect the taxpayers' investment in the facilities, but also to make sure that the facilities have network infrastructures and the wiring, the Wi-Fi systems needed to go and keep us at a high level of technology to be able to go and take the state assessments on computers, to make sure that we can have children be able to connect to the internet and do great projects on the computer. So we have things that are happening on the maintenance, each of the buildings, and also with the networking infrastructure. In terms of budgets, when we look at how all of the funding that's coming into Monomoy is used, The bulk of a school district's budget are its teachers and the personnel behind the scenes. So the personnel costs behind a budget are 69.9% of the Monomoy budget. In terms of how that budget's funded, the bulk of our funding comes from our taxpayers in the two towns. So the assessments, the bill that the school district gives to the two towns is 84.9% of the school district's budget. The state, because we're towns that the state looks at as being towns with means, and the state would look at our two towns and say there's a lot of real estate wealth in both communities. Despite the fact that a number of our families seasonally struggle fiscally, the state would look at our towns as having some great wealth when it comes to real estate. So we're not like some communities in Massachusetts that see huge amounts of state aid coming into their school districts. State aid for us is 1/10 of what comes in from the taxpayers of our two towns. So state aid's just 8.6% of our budget. The next biggest budget piece in terms of how the budget's funded is school choice money. All the kids that are coming in here from other school districts. In terms of how much does it cost to educate a child in any given day? Kids are here 180 days a year. It's $123.32 to educate every child, or on the average child each day. The bulk of that money, again, is personnel costs, being salaries and benefits. As I said, it's a $40.9 million budget. This slide just sort of breaks that budget down in other sort of bigger categories to sort of look at within salaries, wages, expenses, fixed charges, and programs with other schools. This then looks at it from a percentage wise. As I started the presentation, I had mentioned that all in, this budget is a 3% increase over the FY19 budget. If we exclude the out-of-district costs, the out-of-district driver behind this budget, it's a 1.96% budget increase. If we move from budget to assessment, the budget is the total amount of money needed to run the school district. The assessment's actually the bill that each town gets. And the biggest thing driving the assessment, and at least the assessment changes for FY20, is minimum required contribution. And this loops back to the whole conversation I had on a decline in the number of children in Chatham, an increase in the number of children in Harwich has fueled this decrease in minimum required contribution for Chatham by $155,000, an increase in the minimum required contribution in Harwich by $638,000. At the end of the day, the punchline is that pushes Chatham's assessment for FY20 to be slightly less than last year, and it means that Harwich's assessment for FY20 is going to be significantly more than last year. So when we send the assessment sheet or the bill to the two towns, it starts at the top with the total budget number, that $40.9 million budget. You subtract from that state aid, so we're seeing $3.6 million in state aid. You subtract from that how much of the reserve, the excess and deficiency reserve, we're going to use. So we use $550,000 of excess and deficiency reserve. The state reimburses us for some of the charter school tuitions that we sent out. This is your big test. Can anyone remember how much charter school money went out, roughly?
1.2 million.
1.2 million. So 1.2 million goes out, and the state reimburses us $86,000. So we see a small amount of charter school reimbursement coming back in to help defray this. We get some Medicare money, some interest, some miscellaneous revenues. At the end of the day, all of those get subtracted off the total budget. because those are ways that total budget can get paid out of those funds. Transportation, capital, and debt get pulled out because they get assessed separately per the regional agreement. So you come out with an operating assessment. So there's $32.5 million that the two towns need to pay for the operational costs of the school district. That number has the minimum required contribution subtracted from it, from each town. And then the remainder gets split by a 73.45% Harwich, 26.55% Chatham. So we come up with an operating assessment for Harwich of $24.2 million, an operating assessment for Chatham of $8.29 million. When we get down to transportation aid, this is the only place where you'll see that percentage different between Harwich and Chatham, and that's because transportation aid isn't based on foundation enrollment. Transportation aid is based on Chatham children attending Monomoy and Harwich children attending Monomoy, because they're the only ones that would actually ride the school buses. So the transportation aid is based on actual enrollment of children from the two towns at Monomoy. So there's a slight difference there. So the split is 74.3% Harwich, 25.7% Chatham. The transportation budget, the amount of money that we would have to pay to run the school buses, is that $1.254 million. That has from it, it gets reduced by state aid for regional school transportation. This is really the only perk that regional school districts get from the state, is to get some funding to offset transportation. So there are other school districts across the state that aren't regional school districts that may actually elect to charge their parents to have kids ride the bus. We don't do that because if you did, you can't get the regional transportation aid. But it allows us to go and defray a portion of the transportation cost. So so at the end of the day, the state's picking up a little over $500,000 of our busing. We then are responsible for splitting between Harwich and Chatham the remaining $746,000 split, 74.3 Harwich, 25.7 Chatham. There's the debt gets assessed on the same ratios as the operating budget. You'll notice that the last line under debt is that State House note, sort of 1 year with that State House note. And then capital and stabilization, that's the upkeep of the buildings, and the $50,000 for the stabilization fund get assessed on that same ratio as the operating assessment. So it comes up with a total assessment for Harwich of $26,754,276, and for Chatham, $9,178,025, which is a 0.35% budget decrease or assessment decrease for Chatham, and it is a 4.47% assessment increase for Harwich. Again, driven by that change in foundation enrollment, which I would argue is largely driven by challenges that we see and sort of the differential in the housing, the percentage of households and the decline of that between the two towns, where Chatham's households are declining at a faster rate than Harwich's, and that's driving a significant piece behind this this whole budget shift between the two towns. Anyway, that's the soup to nuts presentation 3 times in the last 24 hours. The presentation is online, so if you go to Monomoy website under the school committee, there's a budget link. There's also reams of, what's that? Okay, so it's under finance. Yeah, so So this still is sort of, like, we'll call it, we went from the 30,000-foot view to, down to a little closer to ground level, but there are reams of data behind this that's also up there. So, so we have to submit to both towns sort of a detailed, the budget, this is sort of a budget overview. So all of that information is also posted on the Monomoy website at the finance link, as Joy mentioned.
Question?
I have a question. On the, let's see, the small amount added to the school choice with special education needs, how is that calculated? You had mentioned if we're getting a student in that is coming, I guess, on an IEP, how is that extra small amount calculated?
Do you want to speak to the science behind how the state calculates?
Sure, similar to circuit breaker, there's kind of a calculation for each.
Sorry, thank you, I don't have to get up. Melissa McGuire, Director of Student Services. So it's very similar to circuit breaker. Circuit breaker uses a percentage calculation for the different services that gives you that incremental increase or cost for those services. So it's not a full reimbursement for a service, it's an incremental cost based on a formula.
Okay.
Okay. All right, are there any other budget questions? Well, then I will close the budget hearing, and we need to vote on that one at a time to close the budget hearing. So, Joe?
I vote in favor of closing the budget here.
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay.
I presume we'll re-adjourn in 5 minutes for the school committee meeting.
Nancy. I guess we're hitting a mic. Mike's on, Mike's on.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you try and squeeze? Is that Terry's on?
Okay. I call the meeting of the Monomoy Regional School Committee to order at 7:02. And the first item of business is the approval of the meeting minutes. Are there any corrections?
I move to approve the minutes from January 31st.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And next item on the agenda is the public comment. If anyone has anything they'd like to say, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Richard Waystack from Howardsport. Dr. Carpenter, first of all, thank you very much for your very well-attended listening session last week. I think it was wonderful to see so many people involved. With that in mind, I know many people wanted to be here tonight, parents and townspeople. And I have a question, Madam Chair, for you. Why, with the winter weather advisory, with the fact that the schools canceled all after-school activities, why the town canceled all events tonight, including a planning board hearing and a Board of Health hearing, why did we not cancel this meeting tonight?
Well, I was out on the roads all afternoon, and I thought an inch of snow was not an issue, and by the time I got home and people were wondering, it was too late to call it.
Shouldn't there be someone else who makes a decision if you're not available, either Dr. Carpenter or your vice chair?
Of course. I
Of course,
mean,
but it wasn't done. Okay, just for the record, because everything else was canceled, and you've put your staff, you've put townspeople in peril tonight with roads that are icy to be here, and you laugh at that.
No.
I don't think it's correct that people have to be traveling icy roads to be here.
well, I
With that
did,
in mind, if I can, I've got the floor, ma'am. My comment is that this is a symptom of the disconnect that we're seeing between the schools and the town. Your Monomoy School District Strategic Plan, first objective, talks about the involvement with the community. Your Howard Elementary School School Improvement Plan, first focus item, is about the townspeople working together and having more input to the decision-making process that's happening here with the schools. I think this is a symptom tonight. You get a lot of people who want to talk, and my next question is, during the Spanish discussion, will you be holding public comment from your audience?
yes, but I also would like to say, we will be having this on the next agenda, February 28th, for a discussion and for anyone that was unable to be here because of the storm.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, that's what I was trying to say before. Anyone else?
Janelle Brown, Harwich. I have just been made aware of the survey that went out recently, that there were many families that did not get it. So I have sent an email to everybody asking about, where the results would be, who would read the results, and if they would be made public. But the fact that many families did not get the survey is very disconcerting to me. And I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention.
Anyone else? All right, then I will close the the public comment part of the meeting and move on to recognitions. Dr. Carpenter?
All right, we have a few here. First, I would like to thank the Art Charity for their grant in the amount of $854.90 to Elizabeth Hoff and select students to cover transportation to the Stand Up to Stand Out conference in Lexington, Massachusetts in March. Thanks to the Stage Harbor Yacht Club for their donation of 3 Vanguard 420 boats worth approximately $8,000 to the high school sailing team. Thanks to Shaw's Supermarket, who donated 5 cases of water for the high school perfect attendance celebration on February 6th. Thanks to Cape Cod 5 for a mini grant in the amount of $200 to Beth Connors at Harwich Elementary School. Thanks to the Cultural Council for their grant in the amount of $650 to Beth Connors to support the Only One You initiative in the school gardens path at HES. And I want to acknowledge that on Friday, February 8th, Monomoy Regional Middle School 6th grade students wrapped up a months-long interdisciplinary unit on the finest hours. The students were reading the book. They visited the Chatham Coast Guard Station, climbed the Chatham Light, and went on Coast Guard boats and learned about wireless radio at the Marconi Center. They also got into the replica of the CG 36-500 at the Atwood House Museum. Throughout the unit, students tried to answer the question, what does it mean to be a hero? And the school district invited the first responders to come in to be interviewed by the students about their heroic experiences. The unit culminated in a screening of the film at the Chatham Orpheum, introduced by Casey Sherman himself. The students enjoyed lunch at Chatham Bars Inn with first responders and their guests, and Chatham Bars Inn generously donated the use of the Monomoy room for the Heroes Luncheon. So we'd like to thank Cape Sea Grill for providing some food, the Chatham Squire, Joe Mama's Bagels, Pan de Vion, and the Red Nun. We're lucky to have so much support from so many different organizations in our community. And lastly, a thank you to the Chatham Friends of Trees and the Art of Charity, who generously offered to cover the costs of the field trip. So it was a great gift all around by all. And I also want to graciously thank those involved with the Chatham CPC, which unanimously voted yesterday to approve their support of the Chatham Elementary School playground with a grant of $295,000. So that's will help us go a long way to getting that playground to fruition. And again, sort of looping back to the budget conversations, things we can do in our towns to make them more attractive to young families, better in the long run for having that balance in our communities, and something that would support more school-aged children in the two towns. Lastly, on a more somber note, I would just like to mention that the school district, and particularly Chatham, lost a great friend and advocate with the passing of Ben Nickerson on January 24th. Ben was a long-serving Masonic, on the Masonic Angel Fund, and helped children at Chatham Elementary School and our middle school. His role was as the primary contact with our schools for the monthly Beehive food program deliveries, worked with schools on everything from school supply packages to laptops for kids, computers, and backpacks, and everything else from the Masonic Angels. He was also an active volunteer with the MAF parent organization and the Masonic Angels Foundation, Inc., and he helped assemble school supplies and packages for over 1,800 children, worked on monthly food package assembly projects, and was one of their most devoted volunteers. So our hearts go out to Benjamin Nickerson and his family, and we appreciate everything that he provided our children over the years.
Okay.
Madam Chair, could I just ask for, just for clarification, the Cultural Council grant that you mentioned, was that Harwich or Chatham? I think you just said Cultural Council.
The Chatham, for the CPC?
Actually, I think it was for the garden path.
That's Harwich.
So it was the Harwich Cultural
Okay,
Council for
thank
the
you.
garden path at HES.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair, comment, just respond to Mr. Waystack as far as the disconnect. I don't share that opinion. I've been sitting on this committee voluntarily for a little over 9 years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, and not on this particular 1 hour a night or 2 hours. And I've seen so many connections over these years, starting with the community coming out to build this high school. I've seen hundreds of connections with juniors and seniors treating senior citizens to Thanksgiving for the past 5 years. I could go on and on as far as just the every week Dr.
Jones.
That was a disconnect. I've seen and listened to the awards and the honors and the willingness to compliment this district in the thousands and thousands of dollars over the past 5 or 6 years of donation money to our kids. So I have to graciously disagree, Richard. I think there is one issue here that there's a great deal of passion around, which I commend. And I would always say that there's always a way to get more connections in our type of business. And we'd like to see 50 people here every night. Unfortunately, though, most parents and most advocates respond physically to the one that's heartfelt regarding their own family or their own friends or the kids. And as a result, sometimes that group of people out there can feel that they're really not tied in with us as a school committee. But I wanted to say it. I am so proud to continue to say I think I'll serve another year because I see more worth than worry. Thank you.
Thank you. I second it. No. All right, moving on to reports and discussions. The first thing would be the Unit A contract with the teachers. And
I'll do it. So we have word that the Unit A teachers for Monomoy have ratified the contract. That was, prior to today, a tentative agreement. And so we need to take a vote. We took a vote actually in executive session about it, and that was a unanimous with one abstention, and that will be explained. And so we need to take a public vote. So on that note, I would like to move to approve the Unit A teacher's contract.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No?
Abstain.
Abstain. All right.
Due
And then-
to potential conflict.
And then I'd like to take a
Yeah.
There's just a few moments that on behalf of the school committee and the negotiation subcommittee, we'd like to thank the teachers for their time and the commitment that they put into the negotiations process. While it took a great deal of time, we reached an agreement that I think we all can be very proud of as a committee, as teachers, and as townspeople. Some of the highlights from this contract that will be made public now that it has been ratified by the teachers and approved by the school committee. Some of the highlights are adding in some incentives for being able to choose alternate health insurance plans. While this is not a requirement for the teachers, it is an option for the employee to make a change, and it could benefit both them and the district financially. It includes a compensation increase for all Unit A members that is fair and reasonable for them and for our towns. And it also keeps our teachers in line with the other pay scales around the Cape and especially our neighboring districts. It includes various memorandum of agreements from the years since our last ratified contract. It also includes employee handbook revisions, most specifically to the sections of grading, homework, lesson plans, social media guidance, and teacher web pages. And finally, and probably the most interested topic of all, it does include an appendix that relates to Jocelyn Hour. This is something that has been important to both the school committee and the teachers. And JOSM is something that we all wanted to work toward having in our high school. And I am very pleased with the results. Personally, I'm very pleased, and I know that the committee is very pleased with the results from all of the time spent on this negotiation part. And I feel that everyone will see the positive differences in JOSM. So, I don't know if anybody else.
Madam Chair, I'd like to echo Nancy. I was a member of the negotiating team along with Donna and Nancy, Dr. Carpenter. Is that right? And it clearly is an experience that it at times is adversarial, and when we talk about disconnect for, this is 11 or 12 months that all of the teachers, and I appreciate the fact that 8 or 9 or 10 of their members in Unit A volunteered to sit with us for all of these months to try to reach what would be a fair experience for everyone, the kids, the taxpayers, and the teachers, as well as the school committee. And so I think even though it was difficult and challenging through these months, I think it was a worthwhile sit down to try to reach a point where we could say all of us are doing the best we can. So I want to thank the members of the Unit A negotiating team and those of us who sat in also, and hopefully out of this will grow a great many more moments of connection.
Thank you. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on then. We did.
We voted.
Okay, the next item for reports and discussion is the elementary Spanish and elementary science.
Good evening, Mark Smith, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment for Monomoy. I've been tasked to speak to our recommendation at the elementary level regarding science instruction and Spanish instruction. Each of the principals are here to answer any specific questions that you have relative to their buildings, but after some discussion, we decided that one clear voice working through a presentation was the best way to go. As was mentioned a little earlier, some feedback has been received around since Dr. Carpenter's first presentation around this idea the last school committee meeting. One was the community forum that was already talked about earlier, in which, generally speaking, there were a lot of voices of the school committee members that were there, and the superintendent heard favoring Spanish. Separately, there were emails that were received from school committee members and the superintendent that supported the switch to science. So therefore, we wanted to make sure we had a broad audience in which we sent, so therefore we decided to send a survey out to families. We did focus on the elementary families. This is the group that we, the impact that is impacted most directly. And I know it was spoken to earlier that that the email wasn't received by everybody. I was just quickly, we pulled up the statistics, and I mean, from our end, 1,097 emails were delivered, and the only ones that weren't delivered were those to people who either do not have an email address on file with us, or our email address is blocked on their end. So I would encourage those people to check their spam, make sure it's coming from me. If they would like the survey directly, they can email me directly, and I can send them the link. It's just msmith@monomoy, so people are encouraged to do that. So given where we stand right now, this is as of about 5 o'clock tonight, we had 223 families respond. You can see it's close to a 50-50 split, with definitely a 6% leaning towards retaining the Spanish in the program, or the Spanish program as it is. So that is where the results stand currently. And then, so I sort of was thinking about how do I then segue into the presentation. It was a comfortable segue, and I really couldn't come up with one, so I just figured this is how we would segue. So when we talk about our recommendation to make an adjustment to the elementary program to shift away from a Spanish special and include a science, it's driven by three main factors, which I'm going to use to sort of shape the rest of the presentation. We looked at three different things. First was an evaluation of the structure of our current K-12 foreign language program. It's important, and it's emphasized and underlined. We're talking about the structure. We're not talking about the people. We're talking about the structure in which we are asking people to operate and to deliver a foreign language program to our students, and how well that structure is set up for oral language proficiency. Second was to evaluate our science content instruction at the elementary level. And then lastly was to look at our strategic planning objectives and how that all plays together to support or to drive this particular recommendation. So looking at oral proficiency. So we did some looking at the requirements for oral language proficiency. So the Ohio Department of Education did a study based upon a lot of information that comes out of the American Council on the teaching of foreign language. And you can see on the graph on the right, I know it's going to show up small, it's hard to read, but this is different levels of proficiency. The bottom is a novice, all the way up to the top level, which is distinguished. The lower levels, comparatively, advanced, intermediate, and novice, have sort of a high, medium, and low range within them as well. This is all, again, by the American Council on Teaching of Foreign Language. So in order to reach the high level of novice, so the highest, so sort of, be successful in the novice category, requires, according to the research, between 270 and 300 hours of of language instruction. This is around oral proficiency. And novice, I just pulled out what the little blue box says over there, so that we're all working off of a common definition, again, according to the ACTFL. Novice is someone who can communicate with formulaic and rote utterances, lists, and phrases. So that's what they mean when they say novice. So then we wanted to take a look at the structure in which we operate, sort of thinking about those hours and minutes. So at the elementary school, we offer Spanish 45 minutes a week, which tabulates out to 620 minutes a year. And then do some math, divide by 60 minutes, you get 27 hours a year. A K-4 experience for a student who has Spanish throughout their entire K-4 experience gets 135 hours of instruction. When we move to the middle school, the model shifts a little bit. Students have foreign language for 90 days, and they alternate between the Spanish and Latin. So you're looking at 45 days of actual instruction because of the every other day piece. And so you get 48, and the blocks are obviously a little bit different, so it's a 48-minute block at the middle school. That's 45 days, 2,160 minutes per year, divided by 60, you get 36 hours per year. So from 5th through 7th grade, you get 108 hours of Spanish and 108 hours of Latin. So for your grand totals, you get 243 hours for K-7 Spanish and 108 hours for 5 through 7 Latin. And reminding the lower end of the proficiency is 270 hours. Now there's also some underlying assumptions when they talk, if I just bump back a slide, when they talk about these, there's also underlying assumptions that it's a continuous program and that it makes up anywhere between 5 and 20% of the school day. So that on a daily basis, kids are getting somewhere between 16, between 16 and a half minutes to 66 minutes, that would be the 5% to the 20% of the school day is language instruction every day. So that's sort of the assumption that these hours are built on as well. Now, when we move into the high school, the structure changes. Students are in a foreign language block as a block, and so that's part of the regular schedule. It's a year-long course. I don't know how familiar everybody is with the high school schedule, but it does rotate, so it does drop blocks. So in a 7-day cycle, kids have any of their classes 5 times, as long as they're the full year ones. But so for foreign language falls in that category. In 7 days, they have that particular foreign language 5 times. And so it's a 65-minute block, so 65 minutes times 5, and then I looked at, or times 5 gives you 320 minutes every 7 days. So then you have to look at how many 7-day blocks are there in a school year. And you get a grand total of 138 hours per year. Now, when you run the numbers out further on the scale back on the American Council on Teaching Foreign Language, you can see that in the program design the way it is at the high school, continuous, daily, and the right amount of hours, that kids can advance up into that advanced level on that upside down triangle that we showed. Because the model is set up to support that. It's a structure that is supportive of learning a language to a higher level. So, and then there's other pieces that also go on. There's the language lab at the high school. They bring in, this is just sort of to explain, and none of this we're talking about changing. The kids will continue to have a well-rounded world language experience at the high school. One challenge the high school does face is that only about 50%, I think it's right now, it's dead on at 50%, right, Bill? Yeah, dead on 50% of the 8th graders have opted to take a foreign language. So you have a break there for half of the kids. And that part of that's because of the way the elective schedule, you know, the 8th graders don't have as much freedom in their schedule. They have to make a choice, and about 50% of them, or 50% of them this year, chose not to take a foreign language. And that's pretty consistent so far for Monomoy High School. And then there are further just sort of talking about the bonuses of an immersion program. There's a lot of other great opportunities that happen at the high school that expand not only language opportunities, but also cultural opportunities. This is really just sort of pumping up some of the great things that we're doing as well at the high school. I know some people are concerned about some of the feedback that we've heard is kids won't have enough cultural exposure if we don't have Spanish in the elementary schools. This is just understanding that there are a lot of different ways that we get at cultural proficiency with students. And this is just lets you know, or lets you see how the program is designed at the high school for the courses that are offered. And you can see even in courses where we don't offer, so we don't have French K-7, we don't have Mandarin K-7, we only have Latin 5 through 7, we still offer the same program. And in recent years, we've only had one student who has taken the national proficiency exam, been able to move beyond into a level other than level 1, and it was in Latin. And again, it's not about the people, it's about the structure, the amount of the time that we give to it. Now, if we think about, so this is sort of shifting to the next piece, now looking at science instruction. Why do we need more time for science? So you pulled right out of the standards, I'm not going to read the slide to you, but the recommendations in the science and technology and engineering frameworks calls for 25 minutes a day, approximately 2 hours a week for K-2 students, and 35 minutes a day, approximately 3 hours a week for 3 to 5 students. And we're currently not hitting that number. In some places, pretty woefully hitting that number. Now, we can't have a conversation about standards without having a conversation about the elementary school teacher and what we actually ask an elementary school teacher to do today in 2019. We ask, we being everybody, we and the we's above us that give us the standards and the frameworks that we have to follow. We expect our elementary teachers to be not only content experts in math, in science, in the development of reading, from foundational reading skills, decoding, all the way up to interpreting text and making meaning, to writing, not only to fundamental encoding, but to actually expressing ideas in a coherent way. Those are two very different things. To be experts in social studies and history, to develop civic engagement in our kids, and that's the content. We ask them to also be experts in diverse learners. Our students who are learning English for the first time, our students who have neurological, cognitive, learning disabilities. We ask them to be, I guess, mini therapists in a way. There's a lot of therapeutic and social emotional learning. Students that are coming to us with more and more trauma experiences. Elementary teachers are dealing with all of this. Plus, I could probably sit here and talk more. Think about just right now, we ask them to integrate technology into their instruction. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. There's only so many ways, and you guys will start to learn, I love analogies, There's only so many ways you can split a pie and actually expect to have something left. And I'm an elementary trained teacher. That's what I did before I moved into administration. I was a K-8 principal, and my last job before coming here was I was a pre-K2 principal. I've seen this. When you're an elementary trained teacher, you're not a content expert. You're a generalist by trade. You might spend time learning a particular piece and getting really good at a particular area, but you're not a content expert by background. And for a while, that was, I don't know, the structure wasn't set up in a way that expected you to be a content expert. Now, when you read the standards and you dive into the standards, there's a content expertise in the standards that we haven't prepared people for. And again, we wouldn't ask the physics teacher at the high school to be proficient in the math standards, in the reading standards, in the social studies standards, but we do it at the elementary level. And so we have to address that. And science is, again, I was an elementary trained teacher. I took one science course. It was because it was a prerequisite in the college that I transferred. I went to 4Cs for my first year, then went to Stonehill. 4Cs had a science prerequisite. Stonehill, where I got my education degree, did not. I could have gone through without having to take a science course. And yet, the expectation, and that experience isn't different for really many other elementary school trained teachers. Now, the question has also come up around the specific standards. Just give me a second. The question has been raised, well, can't we cover the science standards in our technology courses? And it's really misleading because it is called the Science and Technology and Engineering Curriculum Framework. However, and I'm going to pick this apart a little bit more, you'll see if you look, there's also the Digital Literacy and Computer Science Curriculum Framework. Those are two different frameworks for which we are responsible in educating children. The second one is the one that most of us think of when we think technology class. But we hear science and technology engineering, we think, oh, it's like computers and stuff. But if you pull, these are the vision statements from the two frameworks, or parts of, they're multiple pages, state can't do anything short. But you can pull the main ideas here, and you can see in the first one, I've highlighted some key phrases. In the Science and Technology and Engineering framework, they're focused on science and engineering. And the technology part comes in because they want people to be consumers of scientific and technological information. The idea here is ultimately, by the time you graduate a 12th grader, you want somebody who can go to a town meeting, hear about a wastewater treatment plan, understand the science behind it and why it might be important, and make an educated vote. That's what they mean by technological information, which is different than the second framework. The second framework works specifically, you see the highlighted pieces on digital literacy, so how to be a good citizen, how to communicate and collaborate over a digital platform, and computer science, like the coding, like actually how you make computers work. Those are the two drivers in that particular framework. So I'm going to drill into that a little bit more. So the science standards are organized into four major categories. You can see there: earth and space science, life, physical, and technology and engineering. And they have sub-standards underneath them. So it gets to be a pretty dense document. I just gave an example and this is sort of making this point about the expertise we're expecting of elementary teachers. And this is just one sliver of what we're asking them to be an expert in. Try not to lose sight of that. So, and this further articulates the idea. So the technology and engineering standards, you can see here, if you read this, it's not about working with an iPad. It's not about using Google Docs. It's about engineer design, understanding about failure points, designing a controlled experiment. And the physical science is another example. This is one that I just so happen to know from recent conversations with the fourth grade teachers that they're struggling to understand how to teach this because it's a really complex scientific idea. It's not easy to understand about light and refraction and how that goes through the eye. I mean, how many of us could do that right now? Can you answer that? It's very difficult and complex stuff. And yet, we're just expecting that we can just do it. Now, when we break into the digital digital literacy and computer science standards. They're organized a little bit different. They're done in grade span, so it's like a K-2 framework and a 3-5 framework. So the 3-5 framework, where the science ones are by grade level, there are all of these different topic areas that are asked to be covered. Each one has a number of substandards underneath it. So you get 62 standards that are being asked to be covered in the 3-year span. Again, a really big task. And most of this is currently being covered in that other special, that technology piece. I know once they move into the 5th grade, there's separate courses, but there's also an integration piece of this into our science instruction back in the classroom as well. And then just again, to pull out, just try to show the difference between science and what our technology classes are trying to address. These are some of those specifics. So if I just toggle back real quick, you can see algorithms is up here. I already forgot which ones are the ones I use. Computing devices. These are some of those topics. And under each there are standards. So these are some of the select ones that I just pulled to show you the range. But you can see they're not about science as much as they're about either how a computer works, how you use a technological device to collaborate with others. There's a piece about using an algorithm in order to solve a problem. This is getting into coding. So we're not just having a conversation about swapping the 45 minutes for the 45 minutes. That, from my standpoint, I would be, that's silly. You're taking one little amount of time and trading it for another little amount of time. What we are proposing and what we've included in our vision for the strategic plan, or as we try to actualize the strategic plan, is a coordinated approach. So we currently have a library class, which we are in the process in, some places are, between the 2 elementaries, they're in different stages, but both moving in the same direction towards a more integrated media-based and library-based model. Including the science teacher and the technology teacher, we would have those 3 courses working in an integrated STEM fashion, supporting the classroom. I'll get into that in a little bit of it in a second. But that these 3 different positions, which 2 of them already exist, and the 3rd one is the one that we're talking about making the change, is an integrated science, technology, engineering, and math approach, where these standards are getting covered across multiple classrooms and looking for places where these standards commingle, and we can develop a nice hands-on approach. The best model of it, in my opinion, is what is going on currently, or the best visual example of it is what is already going on at the middle school, where there's science-based instruction going on in the classrooms, and then there's 2 other classes that the kids are going to that are more on the engineering focus, but it's all, what's the word I'm looking for? It's all works together. And it's reflected in the scores. If you break down the science scores at the middle school, it's the percentage of students that are in advanced and proficient this current year are 18 percentage points above the state. That's a big gap in the right direction. And we want to develop, provide opportunities for those people to work together and co-plan to develop experiential learning activities for kids. These are the parts that fall apart for a classroom teacher, thinking about having to set up a lab experiment for kids when I also have to get to math, reading, writing, history, and I have to somehow pull all these materials together, come up with something engaging that's also going to be learning focused. It's a lot, again, when we shift back to the expectations that we're asking one person to do all these different things. And having a specialist in the building, somebody who knows this elementary science information, then allows for support back in the classroom. Lessons that can support what's going to happen in the special and things that can happen afterwards. And you have somebody to go to that is your science expert. And then if we look at it from the numbers game, so if we're integrating these 3 classrooms and they're all working towards the same piece, you're looking at 157 minutes a week, which is taking the 45 minutes from each of them plus adding the little bit of science that we are getting in at the elementary levels as just a base. So it gives you 2.6 hours a week times 36 weeks, 94.2 hours a year. And in a K-4 experience, that's 471 hours of STEM. So, because I could see the argument, right? You know, well, how are kids going to be any more proficient in science if you're only giving them 45 minutes, if you're making this argument that 45 minutes is Spanish? Because it's an integrated piece, you get more bang for your buck. We don't have an integrated Spanish program. And you could fault us for that, but that's just the reality that we operate inside of. So, and then the next steps beyond that would be for those people to work to support more and more work being done back in the classroom as their expertise is able to, and it's sort of like a coaching and professional development supportive model. So then the last part of this conversation is, or the last, when I listed the 3 drivers, is the strategic plan. So all I really did for this is just to pull up the strategic plan, which, to remind everybody, was started on that Saturday, the 29th, I think, in September, here in the cafeteria, and then there was a group of parents, school committee members, school personnel that helped shape that plan. And this is what the strategic plan, that group, set forth for us as a task, as an action item. And this is our proposal for how to address that particular action item. Questions?
Does the committee have any questions or comments? Yes, Sharon?
So I did not even realize we had a digital literacy requirement to have for the kids that are kindergarten up. Do they learn word processing anywhere in this?
Yeah.
When do they learn that?
Starts in the 2nd and 3rd grade.
So they learn like the old-fashioned where the keys are and all, okay?
Yeah, you start with some initial understanding the lay of the keyboard out, but there's actually developmentally their hands aren't wide enough to reach the actual span. So it's in the 2nd and 3rd grade range where their hands have actually grown wide enough for it to be productive. But they start with some stuff like, touchscreen, getting the sense of how a keyboard's laid out at a younger age, but the actual formal keyboarding piece.
Do we think there's almost any kids that don't know a lot of that?
The keyboarding piece, you'd be surprised, actually, because they come in pack,
but some of these other things. I appreciate your thing. I think we might need, at least personally, much more information about this, because it's the first that's come up to me about it. And some of the language, I'm just not up on all the algorithms and things like that, especially for the lower grades.
Yeah, and those were, again, pulled from the 3rd through 5th grade, so it's, as much as I'd like to think I'm that important, I didn't make that stuff up.
Thank you.
Tina?
Yeah, I have a question on the integrated STEM approach. In library and media, what are some examples of STEM that will happen in the library and media?
Do you guys want to answer that question specifically at the elementary? You want to, actually, maybe you could talk about some of the things you already have going on. So I'm going to ask Robin, come up, just talk a little bit, Dr. McMillan, to come up and talk about some of the things that, because her person actually does both because of the size of Chatham Elementary, so they've already got some great stuff going on.
Thank you.
I'm Robin Millen, principal at Chatham Elementary School. So right now, our library media specialist, she coordinates, like that circle, with all of our classroom teachers. So if I give you a specific example of one way that she's currently coordinating in the science and technology way, is that what
Yes.
the question was? So we have a capstone in almost every grade except for 3rd grade that revolves around science. So 1st grade is an animal study, 2nd grade is a pollinator unit. 3rd grade is the one that the capstone is in social studies. 4th grade is in the a STEM fair that they do. They do a engineering fair. That's only one of their capstones out of 2, a state fair. But inside that, they coordinate with the library media specialist. So she does both the research design, but she also does the integration of like the technology. And I know Dr. Carpenter's talked about this a lot. Like they work on a Powtown cartoon where they can come together and share the experimental design or the design process that they went through in order to design their experiments for their fourth grade capstone when they're trying to solve a problem revolving around pollution inside the state that they're studying. So it's a very integrated, multi-dimensional type of coordination that they do. So she takes care of both the science standards in the presentation and informational part of it that Mr. Smith just talked about. So she offers that part of that side of it.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question. So I love all that. I'm more familiar with the library, where the librarian
Right.
helps the kids understand the library and reading a book and having them enjoy that and check out books. Do they also do that?
Yes, so
How
the
do they
library
fit that all
standards have
in?
changed significantly over the last couple of years. The checking out the books and the book actual standards of that kind of what we would traditionally say of a library person have changed only to the librarian herself or himself. They are actually responsible for making sure that's happening, but the standards for the children are no longer like that. They're the digital media, the informational resourcing, accessing text so that they can make those decisions and coordinate all those other content areas through the library. And you've heard me talk a lot over the last couple of years about transitioning our library and our library media to the Learning Commons. So, I'm sorry, somebody's looking for me out there. To that being the hub and the source of the information rather than, yes, they do implement the love of reading and all, our children check out books and they do all those things. On top of that, the standards have changed to that resourcing and being the resource for that information.
Thank you.
Mary, did you?
Hi, I'm Mary Oldak, principal of Harwich Elementary. At Harwich Elementary, the integration between library, media, and technology is happening once a month in Makerspace Week, and the children have one period of library media a week and one period of technology a week. And so during that week, they go to Makerspace twice. And it's a collaboration between our technology teacher, Larry Burkhart, and our library media specialist, Sarah Eidman. And they've taken the Makerspace model and have integrated all sorts of problem solving around challenges where we have, through our book fair last spring, we were able to purchase integrated electronic circuits called Little Bits, Dash and Dot robots, where the kids are coding, all sorts of different types of building structures where the children have a challenge to solve. And it's just started in October, and the children absolutely love it because it's so engaging and they're given a problem to solve and they have to work together as a team to solve it. But that is how, at Harwich, how we're integrating technology with library media. And I have to say the landscape of the library has changed dramatically, as Dr. Millen referenced. We even see that at Brooks Free Library. Sarah Eidman and Ann Carpenter from Brooks Free Library went and visited a library in Millbury where they have integrated the makerspace and STEM throughout the school, and went up there to see that as a model of how to bring that back into the public library and into our school library as well. Any questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, sorry, before you go away, I'm just curious with Spanish now, is there any integration or is the Spanish teacher just on her own teaching Spanish? Is she doing any partnering in any of these other areas, like in the library, the media?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and following themes within the classroom, holidays that are experienced, and also in terms of the social emotional support of our students as well.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone? Oh. Wait, you have a question?
Sorry, you're going to go through the chair, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Just protocol-wise, yeah.
Could you state your...
Jane Sullivan, and I am a grandparent of 3 Monomoy students, 2 in the elementary school and 1 in grade 6. And I would be the last one to say that science is not important. However, I did look at the survey, and I believe you said there were 223 responses?
As of 5 o'clock.
Okay, so you do the math out, I think it's about 124 that would be in favor of the retaining the science program and the rest, retaining the Spanish program, the rest for the science program. I have 200 signatures of people who would like to see the science program, Spanish program, sorry, reinstated. No one on that sheet, and there was a place for comment, said, let's get rid of science. Nobody wants to see that. And I certainly don't want to see that for my grandchildren. However, with it being so close, and this survey that went out, I take a little bit of exception to it because there were 2 paragraphs in the survey telling how wonderful science was and how all the great things that were going to happen and why you really needed this, to have all of this extra science. And the last paragraph of the survey reduced Spanish to an after-school club. So when parents got this survey and they looked at it, naturally they're going to say, yes, we want science. I don't think they were really saying we want science instead of Spanish. If you just sent out a survey that said pick one, then maybe pick one. But nobody wants one over the other. With all the great minds in this district and all the people in this room, and with your wonderful Nauset mind, I would hope that you would spend some considerable time on this. Put your heads together and come up with something that incorporates both. Why would you take something away from children, something that has something positive to them, to give them something else that they also need? But they need Spanish too, when you have it, and they've needed it all along. It's part of your vision statement for world languages. Your world language vision statement incorporates Spanish from kindergarten all the way through to high school. So what do? Change that now and say, well, it wasn't really that important. Science is more important. Put your heads together and make the parents happy, make your taxpayers happy, make the citizens of this town happy. Do a little thinking on this. Provincetown does it. Truro does it. Eastham does it. Orleans does it. Get your act together, Howard. Thank you.
Anyone else? Janelle, did you want to speak?
Yes, please. So I have a few things that I would like to say about that presentation. As far as the high novice and 270 hours, if you add the Latin in, they actually have 351 hours by the time they finish 7th grade. My daughter's in 7th grade right now. Spanish has been her favorite subject from kindergarten until now. She feels proficient that she could travel to a Spanish-speaking country and get along. So proficient that she is planning on taking Mandarin next year. She's not continuing her Spanish. So I would say she probably is a high novice at this point. And Latin being the root of Spanish, I feel that we need to add those hours into that general number in order to get a real accuracy of proficiency in language by the time the students are graduating 7th grade. So that's one thing. I am a pre-med major with a minor in ecology, and I have a science teaching certificate for grades 5 through 12. I understand science. I understand that Mark Smith, unfortunately, you don't. I get that. But science is not hard to teach. It's very easy to teach. I teach after-school enrichment courses. I teach science in an hour. I teach how to concoct soap. That's science. I teach how to cook. That's science and math. I also teach beading. That's art. So there's a lot of things you can teach in an hour. So I feel that presentation basically told me that our elementary school teachers aren't doing the job that they should be doing. Is it their fault? Not necessarily. They don't have the tools to teach the science, is what I heard. So why don't we give them the tools to teach the science in the classroom? Last Tuesday night, I heard that Harwich Elementary students get 22 minutes a week of science, yet tonight we're hearing that they should be getting 25 minutes a day for K through 12, 35 minutes a day for 3rd and 4th. Why aren't we looking to change that within the classroom? The teachers don't know how to do it. Well, let's bring in people that do know how to do it. Let's, have volunteers. Let's teach the teachers. We just also had on the budget hearing, I think it was $18,000 for summer enrichment for the teachers to learn extra things, and $15,000 for reading, is what I wrote. So $33,000 is being spent on educating teachers. Let's get some science in there for them, the elementary school teachers, so we can have everything together. And then the last thing, two things. Harwich Elementary has actually, I think, a world-renowned, I'm not positive about that, maybe state-renowned, astronomy lab. Do our kids even know that? My kids didn't know that. But we have these instruments that have been granted to our district, to our school, that aren't being used. Why isn't that being part of the curriculum? We have these tools already. Why can't we just open that closet, bring out these instruments, teach the kids some more STEM, and keep Spanish at the same time? And then I just have a question. That three-person support system for the classroom teacher. One was the library media, one was science teacher, and one was technology teacher. It seems to be contradictory to the two curricula, digital literacy and computer science curriculum, and science and technology engineering curriculum. It seems that we have science and technology, yet we've got two curriculums, but we've got three parts. So I'd like an answer for that, please.
So in reverse order, and if I missed something, please let me know. There's a lot there. But so as far as the integration piece goes, there are two different sets of standards. There are certain places where they do overlap. So like in the engineering design process and the scientific method, they're two very similar things. As well as I can't remember the specific name of it. There's another design process for coding, which is very similar. So working with those similar themes, there's also practice standards set in each of them, which talk about habits of mind that we want to develop in scientists and students that are working with digital media literacy. So things like perseverance, attention to detail, being able to explain your reasoning. These are all places that you can find overlap. Both sets of standards are also experimentally driven. A great example of how it works well, again, if I point back to the middle school, working with these two sets of standards together, where there's a person at the middle school who handles more of the computer science side and somebody who handles more of the engineering side. Students will work on projects together where they move back and forth between those two classes. That's how the model is actualized there. But there's overlap between the two. But we still need somebody who has this science expertise. So I'll dovetail into the piece about me not being smart in science. I wasn't trained. I ultimately became a middle school science teacher because I put the individual time, energy, and effort into it. And science can be fun and easy to teach when you have an opportunity to develop the content knowledge. A pre-med background would give you a lot, and an ecology background would give you a lot of science content understanding in order to be able to then apply to teach. You can't teach something that you don't know that well. I can't teach somebody how to disassemble a carburetor. I don't know how to do it, so I can't teach somebody else how to do it. Now, could I put time, energy, and effort into it? Yes, but these same people were asking to be math experts. Just had a math training here today, and that is ongoing. We're asking them to be reading experts. We're asking them to be writing experts. It's not as simple as just bringing in some science teaching for the teachers. And the question is always around when, right? It goes back to that same idea of how many times can you split the same pie. The same person needs to be getting further instruction and training in how to be an expert in helping kids who are struggling to read. If somebody needs further instruction in helping kids that are struggling to write, be mathematicians, to understand civics, there's only so many times I can take those same people out of their job, which is to teach and to train them. And I can offer some stuff during the summer. It does have a cost. And I also can't mandate people to come up in the summer. So if we need to get something to people, there's only really one way to do it, is do it when they have to be here. And if we do it when they have to be here, then they're not in front of the people that we want them to be in front of, which is the students. I think that was all the main ideas. If I missed one.
I only had one question. You answered it first. So
okay.
Good.
Mr. Waystack?
Great presentation. A couple questions, and I know I'm not a math major, but you had said 6% difference in the survey, 44 to 56 is actually 12% difference, not just a 6 percentage points. So it's a question on the Ohio State study that you looked at?
It's Department of Ed of Hawaii.
Okay. Did you look at other studies?
That was the one that I pulled.
Okay, did you look at any studies that talked about recommending the age for students to be immersed in language?
Yeah, those recommended at a young age. We just don't have an immersion program.
Okay, but what your principal just said is that it may not be an immersion program, but it's being integrated in the curriculum, other areas in the elementary school, is that correct?
Not the Spanish. Other things are being integrated.
No, she said others, you did say that, correct? In the art, you said the Spanish was being integrated in other areas of the curriculum.
The other way around.
No, she said Spanish as well.
I am Mary Oldak, principal of Harwich Elementary School. Our Spanish teacher does coordinate with classroom teachers around themes at times throughout the year.
Right, so where the
Not immersion.
theme of the classroom is being brought into the
So-
Spanish classroom, correct? Is that what you mean by that?
And the Spanish into the other classrooms. That's exactly what she said.
No, that's-
I heard differently.
So are they teaching Spanish, Mary, in the general ed classroom?
Okay. But they're integrating it with other times. Again, what I'm hearing is we have some of the most educated people in this community here tonight. Yourself, people in the school committee, Dr. Carpenter. And I keep hearing we can't. I keep hearing science versus Spanish. And you started with, well, it really is not, but then you ended that way. We need to find out how we can accomplish it. You see 223 people who signed a petition saying we want to keep Spanish. You have parents who are passionate about saying that it's important to their kids. We see studies that tell us that immersion or introduction to language in earlier age makes it easier as they go through the school system. How? How can we keep it? You looked at 4, I think it was, if I look at your numbers correctly again. With STEM, it comes out to 471 hours. Spanish is about 27 hours of the year. Can't we find that time somewhere? And I know it's difficult, but putting our minds to it to keep it, and you talked about the strategic plan, to be. Objective 1 is integrating the community and the parents in the decision-making process. And I think that's what you're seeing here tonight, and I think that's what you'll see next time you agenda it on your school committee meeting. So I hope you can think, and I hope a decision hasn't already been made, where a cut has been made for a Spanish teacher or the Spanish program, that you can come together to say, how can we keep this for the students that want it and for the parents who are so passionate about their students having it. I think it would go a long way to working with the community, and frankly, as I said last week, I don't want to be having this discussion on town meeting floor when we're discussing the budget. Thank you.
Joe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to do some
You're
editing
next.
as I go along. Please forgive me. I think I have about a half hour worth of comments.
Oh, crap.
Should have called me.
Not
Should call me first.
surprising for those who know me.
Do you want to think about them?
I think my first point would be to say, actually, my very first point is to say, for those of you standing in the back, please come sit down. There's some chairs up front. You've been standing a lot, and take it easy, relax. I was thinking primarily
was
of
your
the
point?
women, but that's a little... I wish this were a heck of a lot easier. I wish we could just say, let's identify the bad things in the elementary school curricula and let's remove them. That would be a really, really happy resolution for all of us, and we could put our minds together to identify what's inadequate, weak, or frivolous and make way for much better things. Unfortunately, that path is not the way forward. The curriculum in Chatham and in Harwich just doesn't have an abundance of weak stuff and fluff that we can remove. Okay, so now we come to harder things. And I have to say, my own bias is towards language. I'm the son of immigrants. My father was a modern language teacher of French and Spanish, although his native language was Italian. He studied in Puerto Rico and in Paris, had advanced degrees in these languages. He rehearsed his lesson plans with me over breakfast every day, including the day he died. I'm very much in favor of this idea. If you look politically in the United States, the number of immigrants, legal and illegal, coming into the country, something like 1 million people a year, means we are an increasingly Hispanic country, and Spanish is the second language of the United States, formally, informally. And I'm not interested in talking about the politics of any of this. It's just the fact that our graduates are going to be working with Spanish-speaking people, or people for whom Spanish is their first language, whether our students become lawyers, businessmen, you name it. They're going to be involved with a population that is Spanish identified. And also, frankly, if you want to go into this, American Council of Teaching a Foreign Language, go to their website. They'd love the idea of teaching Spanish in the elementary school. They want more of it. And there's a disappointing statistic here. You know, 50% of our 8th graders are taking Spanish. Well, if we had more Spanish in elementary school, perhaps that number, and if they had positive experience, which we seem to hear that they are, as I would expect from the quality of our teachers, maybe that number would go up. So let's put all that on one side. On the other, there's some really troubling statistics here. What's the, I'm sorry I don't have it quite in front of me. Our students are receiving approximately 1/5 the recommended time of science instruction, recommended by, in terms of, recommendation in terms of STE. That's a thoroughly inadequate number. I would have put it up in, I would have made a whole page just on that one point, Mark, frankly. I think it's that important. I think that's an extremely important point to address. You see where I said I have about a half hour worth of stuff to talk about. I haven't even gotten to all the reasons why I'm leaning more in favor of science rather than Spanish in elementary school. I would just say one thing, and try to stop on this point. I want to see our students attend college, the best colleges they can, and higher education is intensely competitive. And we think about competition for seats in higher ed, and a lot of our students are thinking of they're competing with DY and NOSIT and so forth. Well, we're also competing on a world scale. And the thing is, our standards, the standards that we are striving for, the standards that the state talks about and the ones that we have, the standards in science that we have in our strategic plan, which makes sense for us, which makes sense for Chatham, which makes sense for Harwich, are really inadequate on a world scale. I'm thinking of international schools, American schools in places like Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Hong Kong International School, Taipei American School. Just Taipei alone, one school, an American school in Taipei, has 2,200, 2,300 students. They're geared towards taking advanced degrees in the United States. Their mission plan from grade 1 is to be immersed in English, come to the United States to attend college. Also to marry a Taiwanese spouse, have a child in the United States, have the passport, and then go back home and raise that child. That's a world of international competition that we don't usually think about. Our standard to conduct a comprehensive review and so forth and come more in line with the state requirements, the standard in Jakarta, Bangkok, Taiwan, and Hong Kong that I'm familiar with and already, when I was in Asia, already in various places in Tokyo, Seoul, and others, was so far beyond this. Taipei American school students at this point in school have to build a functioning robot as part of their graduation requirement. We don't ask that. We can't approach that level. I got to see some of my colleagues after I left school because they were flown from Taipei to Cambridge. They visited MIT science labs, robotics labs, and they bought the labs. They bought the lab. The lab that MIT has, they bought it, they got the folks who built it to come to Taiwan, build it for them so that their graduates can go from Taiwan to MIT and seamlessly integrate because they're working in the same labs. We can't even come close to thinking about that. Our students are going to be at such a disadvantage when you compare the competition on a world scale. You can now take about 10 minutes and talk about what China does in its science programs and how we compare to that vis-a-vis the United States. I'm not even going to talk about it because there isn't time. And I apologize for the time I've taken. But in this debate, I think the work we have to do in science is so important that I would vote to move Spanish away from the elementary level and add science component because I think it's that fundamental and that it's that important. I wish this was a heck of a lot easier. Unfortunately, it isn't. But to begin to bring our students on the level of a student educated on a world scale, that is the world in which they're really going to live, we have to do much, much more, and I don't want to lose this opportunity. Thank you.
Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. That was very well articulated, and I don't think I have to touch on the importance of science or Spanish in this case. I have to say, as a school committee member and also serving on the finance subcommittee meeting, it was beyond my wildest imagination that this would be so controversial considering everything else that the district is doing, changing, updating, revising, coming off of the strategic planning, all those documents being public and for people to view. So it definitely came as a surprise, I think, to the board. I think that, I will admit, I feel like we are doing a little bit of backstepping because we were taken aback by the response of the movement of the curriculum, but not without due diligence and listening to the people who are experts in this and the people who do feed our committee all the information. We do a lot of homework behind the scenes other than sit here every other Thursday at the table. I think the survey was in the best effort to give feedback to the community that we are listening. But I will say that a survey is only a survey, and I don't think it certainly encompasses everyone and their opinions. As you saw, not everyone has, we haven't gotten 100% response from it. I understand there was a petition out as well, but I also say to that, I think part of a petition can be personal and not program related, and it's hard to differentiate signatures on a petition when they're signed for various reasons, which I think everyone understands. I think our teachers do an amazing job in the diversified classrooms that they have with the amount of information they are responsible for, the testing, their own responsibilities, their own education and continuing education. To expect more of them at this point would be selfish on this district's behalf, and I think Mark spoke to, he did not say selfish, but he spoke to how much we're already trying to cut that pie up. And this is coming from the top down as far as where we need to come with our science and technology, and we have an opportunity and a good base right now. So that is kind of where my energy is coming from with all the research, while listening and learning about all the other benefits that folks may have for Spanish. It's not to go unsaid that there's not a cultural aspect, there's not exposure to the language, that an immersion program of Spanish wouldn't be effective. It certainly would. Time constraints have been brought to the table. Where are we going to fit this in? Not too long ago, when we when we became the district, Harwich had Spanish and Chatham did not have Spanish. So what did we do? Chatham lost a gym class, and Chatham then had Spanish, so they could be just like Harwich. That was a battle, losing a gym class to integrate that Spanish. So it's not like this is the first time we've come up against walls. You know, and I sit here and I think, well, what would I want to take out? Do I want to take out art? Well, no, because I'm going to have a totally different audience sitting here in front of me complaining or upset or with justified comments about why we can't take art out of the school. Do we want to take out library media? Well, that obviously serves a role in some function of school. Do we want to take out gym? Should we cut minutes in recess? Should we cut minutes out of lunchtime? Maybe we should cut minutes out of math. Where do you stop? Where do we stop and say too much? How many of us have children that are spread so thin in out of school programs and private programs and rec programs that they are spread thin? We are an educational institution and we need to stay focused on the basic foundation for these kids. And that is what we're trying our best to do and to fit into this curriculum while following what the state is asking, while researching studies, while hearing what our principals are telling us they need, while hearing the superintendent tell us what he needs, while hearing our curriculum director say what he needs. Oh, wait, here comes the state again, what we need, you know, and what the town wants, what the community members want. There's a lot of moving pieces, and there certainly is not any simple solution. It's not just as simple as, well, why can't we just have both? You know, I wish we could. I wish I could have a lot of things, but you can't always have both. So we're trying to find the most equitable way to do this, and that takes time and it takes a little bit of research. And I'll go right back to where I started. I had no idea that there would be so much passion behind Spanish, and I think we're doing the best we can with the time constraints we have to address the situation. I would like to have either Mark, I know Mr. Waystack may have mentioned a study that you had referenced, but I think that Principal Millen has also looked at some studies regarding this, and if we could have an opportunity for her to speak about some of those studies, if she's okay with that, to maybe kind of, or not particularly those studies, Dr. Millen, but if there are other studies out there, that would be helpful. Not to put you on the spot, because...
That's okay. Robin Millen, principal of Chatham Elementary School again. So when we were having this discussion, obviously you know I'm a researcher and I love to look at the research. So I pulled several studies, and again, it's not a full lit review, so I've got what I've got. But I pulled a study, original basic study that came from 1984. He's going to try to pull a study for me. And then I pulled a more recent study from 2008, I believe. In those studies, they talked about the best practices for elementary FLES instruction. So there's three different, I know we want to give it to this Dr. Carpenter, but three different types of places that foreign language in the elementary school can go to. One is called FLES, foreign language in the elementary school. One is called FLEX, and then there's an immersion or a partial immersion type of program. Basically, through these studies, they developed how much time the students have in those classrooms, whether it's a Spanish class, a Latin class. I have a professional colleague out in Los Angeles. He has a immersion Russian school. I have another colleague out in San Diego that has an immersion Spanish school. So it can be any language that you choose, but how that construct, and we talk about structures, how that construct is inside your classrooms. Basically, what we have at Chatham Elementary and at Harwich Elementary is sort of a FLES program, and basically why I say that is because in a FLES program you need a certain percentage of time in Spanish per day, equivalates out about 30 minutes per day. We don't have anything near that. We have 45 minutes per week. So we get to the point where we don't have 2 to 5% of our school instruction in Spanish. We have less than about 3% per week. With a FLES type of program, the sequential FLES with that 30 minutes a day, the proficiency outcome for students is low proficiency. Okay, limited proficiency, there's the study. So they do have other outcomes. I mean, you do generate an interest in the language and the culture, you do generate the interest in the future language instruction, not necessarily in the language that you have the FLEX program in, but in a future study. And so that is what we have here in some part of the form. What they have mostly at the middle school, and I would argue maybe even kind of in our schools, is that foreign language exploratory. So that's, again, the 2 to 5%, and Mr. Smith talked about this. Again, when you have that kind of instruction in the K-6 system, you have very limited proficiency coming out of that. Again, we don't have those numbers at our schools. He has it more at, and Mark can talk about it, Mr. Wilson can talk about it if he wants for that school. Again, there are those outcomes, interest in language and culture is there, interest in future languages and cultures for that, because you're exposed to more. I mean, we translate Chatham Elementary School newsletters in 8 languages. We're only giving culture, if we're thinking we're only giving culture in Spanish, we're not. We've got to expose culture all the way along, and an exploratory is actually better for multiple interests in that. The most effective, and this comes from the same study that Mark did, but also the other ones that I looked at, is the immersion and the partial immersion schools. And that is difficult. I mean, that's 50 to 100% of your school day being taught in that immersion language. So I said I have a professional colleague out in Los Angeles. His children learn social studies, science, they have their PBIS, their positive behavior in Russian. They learn Russian all day long. They're immersed in Russian. And that school is a total immersion school. It's 100% of your day. You can imagine some of the cons to that. I mean, he had to find a dual language faculty that could speak Russian. I would not be the principal of that school. I could not talk to the cafeteria and tell them their expected behaviors in the classroom or in the cafeteria in Russian. It's a difficult thing to implement. My colleague in San Diego just is doing a partial immersion in Spanish. He's had to ask 15 of his very well-respected teachers to move to other schools in that district so that, because they don't speak Spanish, because they're learning social studies and stuff. However, that is the model in the elementary school that has the most benefits. 50 to 100% of the school day gets you you're teaching content of social studies, science, mathematics. The children are developing an interest in the language and the culture, not just an interest in, studying it, but they want to study not only that language, but they want to study other foreign languages as well. And then, in the end, they have a proficiency in that foreign language after they exit on the K-6 system. It's the same, it's the same type of basis for that study. I'm sure if you went into the references for the earlier dialogue, it is probably quoting these studies as well.
Questions that study?
We have.
Would you come up to the microphone?
Just quick. This gets back to the discussion last week. The last column, is it the goal to be proficient as 6th graders in language, or is it, like the outcomes in all of the columns, to have an interest in language and culture, to have an interest in learning, or is it proficiency? What are we looking for?
So it's not a question of one over the other, it's a question of priorities. Actually I would dovetail it nicely to the budget conversation. I've been in administration long enough to know that there's never enough money to do what you want to do. You have to make decisions, right? You have to make priorities. I'll circle this back to a presentation I did to the school committee maybe 2 or 3 meetings ago where I was talking about curriculum, some of the things that I've learned, and sharing some facts, which is that when you digest the elementary curriculum, when you look at science, math, science, social studies, all the different pieces that we're asking teachers to do, and if you were to teach the standards to the depth in which the standards are written, you're looking at somewhere around 400 days of instruction. There are only 365 days in a year, and we only go to school 180 of them. So we're already making decisions about what can't be included. So it's not about not thinking this is beneficial. It's about having to make priority decisions. And based upon the strategic plan and based upon where we vision needs going forward, and also understanding that we do have a strong language program at the high school that allows kids to exit high school with an AP in 4 different languages. That this is a priority decision that we have to make based upon the realities that we're working inside of. And again, you're working inside of a 6.5-hour school day that has lunch and has recess, has transition time, has little brains that are 6 and 7 years old, and we're having to make decisions about, what do we think is the best way to move the kids forward, to hit and again, this is our projection of what we are prioritizing at the elementary level, not because we don't think everything would be great. I would love to have our kids leave speaking 3 languages and also be proficient in all these different areas, but we are working within realistic confines.
Yes, Janelle?
2 things about the curriculum. I have a friend who asked for the curriculum for Harwich Elementary and was told that there is not one. But secondly, why would we have a 400-day curriculum? Why? That doesn't make any sense to me. If we have a curriculum, why wouldn't it be parallel to 180 days of school? Why would we even consider a curriculum that's 400 days?
I don't think I did a good job of communicating my point. My point was that, and I could pull up an whole other presentation, the way curriculum is developed is we are all given standard. You guys will enjoy, I'll give you my analogy again, right? So use an architecture analogy. Standards are like building code. It's what the state says, if we're going to build a building, you have to operate inside this building code, right? Standards are the same way. The state says kids are supposed to learn these things at 3rd grade, these things at 4th grade. They give us all the different areas that they're supposed to learn these particular things. Then what a school district does is they make a curriculum decision. A curriculum decision is like an architect's plan. You can build a wide variety of buildings that still meet the building code. And architects tend to have their personal flares that they put into building. And I'll give you the same one architectural term I know. One puts buttresses in and another ones don't, and I don't know any more other architectural terms. So so we develop a Monomoy curriculum. So the way that we are trying to address the particular standards. The point about the 400 days is, if we were to try to teach exactly what the standards say, we would need 400 days in order to do that. So then we have to make collective decisions as a school district on what we're going to prioritize, what's going to stay, and what's going to go. And the curriculum helps teachers so that they're doing that together, and it's not individual. So if you've got 7 4th grade teachers, that this one 7th grade teacher, 4th grade teacher is making decisions about what he or she's going to practice, because it's a reality. There's more information that they can cover in 180 days. So either we leave them to make their own decisions, and kids then progress to the next level with a mixed set of skills because a particular teacher prioritized these, or we work with them to make decisions together on what is going to stay and what's going to go. And it's just the reality that we operate inside of.
Okay, thank you. Last comment. Yep, and because we're going to be discussing this at the next meeting as well.
So this is about the curriculum. My son's in 3rd grade, and the differences among the teaching tools in the 3rd grade are vast. What one class is getting, another class is not getting. So I would like to know where I can find this curriculum and how I can work with you to make sure that each teacher is actually teaching to the curriculum. I was told that it's up to a teacher to decide if he or she wants to teach the curriculum.
So again, the previous presentation was sort of my fact-finding mission, in which I shared to you guys that, part of the merger was that a lot of work got done and a lot of stuff got thrown together. But there is definitely some inconsistencies. And so that is I laid out the plan for how we're going to attack that over the next set of months and years in order to accomplish that across the entire pre-K-12 spectrum. And that is, Dr. Carpenter, you mentioned some of the money in the summer. A lot of the money in the summer is actually dedicated towards that work.
So Mark, all the teachers teach to the same standard.
Yeah.
They just choose to teach their own style.
Yeah, it's a sort of a well, there's that, because then the sort of the next level in the analogy, which I didn't share this particular time, is interior decorating. That you can have a home or a development in which all the homes are the same. That's sort of like the Monomoy curriculum, right? But each person that lives inside that home makes adjustments to that home to meet their needs. Whether it's a feng shui thing, whether there's somebody in that household that lives in a wheelchair, so you need 3-foot doors, and you're going to make some, everything has to be a 3-foot doorway. Or maybe you've got young children, and anybody who's had young children know that you don't put anything decorative lower than about 2.5 feet off the ground, because you don't want it to be broken. So those would be sort of the individual decisions that teachers make. But we do have work to do curriculum-wise. Because teachers the curriculum should provide them with the decisions already as far as what we're going to prioritize, not only from a September to June scale, but then how that affects the following grade and the following grade and so on and so forth.
Thank you.
That's the role of curriculum.
Oh, go ahead, that's great. I can let someone else go.
Okay, Terry?
Thanks, Donna. A couple of thoughts as I've listened. I've learned more about what our Spanish program does for the kids as well as what science could do. It strikes me, we also worried about coming to this around this issue and how much seriousness the school committee, the superintendent, and whatever folks we have at the central office would give to it. And it reminds me, and this is great stuff. I'd rather be talking about this than bus contracts. It reminds me 3 years ago that through our central office, and most of us as parents, my 2 kids came through this Howard system years ago, and math always was a weak area, K through 12. Our scores statewide were weak, average at best, math. So 2 or 3 years ago, with a committee of teachers, primarily elementary teachers, K through 7 or so, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Carpenter, see, I'm getting better with the name. It was just a slippage. They came and gave us a 3-month study and came forward with, I think we need to have Janelle a curriculum in math, K7, called Math in Focus from a Singapore group. No parent meetings. We spent an hour with the lead teachers of that team telling us the advantage of the other 2 or 3 programs that were studied. And there was a unanimous vote here, along with $250,000 of your taxpayer money, which covered all the books, K through 7, and thousands of dollars worth of teacher training over the course of years, which I would imagine is still going on. And these elementary teachers are probably still learning and struggling with how did this come about? Well, there were several districts throughout the Commonwealth that had ones in math based on this Math in Focus, so it seemed to be a terrific program to adopt and buy into. So the teachers are probably still learning through team leaders how best to put that in. That's Math in Focus. Results aren't here yet, but we're hopeful. A month, 2 ago, strategic planning in September, there was a niche of 40 minutes, 33 minutes, 50 minutes to try to boost the kids' thoughts around learning of STEM. But we'd have to steal something, because right now, Rich, we've looked, and I'll say in the next 2 weeks, look some more if there's a way to get both. That the only spot that seemed to be appropriate to still keep Spanish in the middle and high school to get X percentage of kids going on to 3 or 4 years of Spanish was in this enrichment block. I've attended a pairing. Dr. Carpenter had a meeting a week and a half ago with 30 or 40 folks with 9 topics, one of which was how best to keep the Spanish program. We've had this evening, which was the vast majority of our minutes have been shared with this topic, how best can we learn from in doing this or doing something. And then 2 weeks, we'll come to a vote, but also that evening. So as far as we're getting better with parent input on a program that equally or co-equally has 2 goods in it. And we're having a challenging time right at the moment in enrichment in Spanish at K right through 4, or STEM/science enrichment, as well as plugging in with a media circle that may enhance the kids' ability to measure up as students within the state standards in 3 or 4 or 5 years. So I'm hopeful. I don't know about hopeful, and Joe, I commend you. Great thoughts on what everyone else in the world is doing. Jackie, likewise. So hopefully, I think as a group, I'd love to have 10 or 15 parents every other week coming here to share with us their thoughts about programming. And when they don't come, because life is busy, we have to assume, as leaders and have been elected, to do the best we can to make a judgment. And sometimes it's as the polls go like this. So, thank you for the good stuff, and we move towards making some of our best, the best decisions we can make.
Dr. Carpenter?
I've been at least silent today on Spanish and science. And just wanted to chime in and put a couple people on the spot. Since we haven't heard from Mark or Bill, I'll have to just at least have them come in and at least answer one question. Because at the community forum last week, someone asked, well, whose decision is this? And I said, ultimately, moving forward a budget recommendation, it's the superintendent. It's like the buck stops here. But this is sort of a unanimous thing that's coming from the administrative team on a direction that we think the district needs to head. And one of the things, if we go back and just kind of couch this in the strategic plan, the third objective is to close the achievement gap. And in that, we have our second initiative says to implement appropriate research-based, data-guided, innovative practices. And I think what Mark was getting at when he was putting up that first slide, we do teach Spanish, and we've got great teachers teaching Spanish. We have a structural challenge in how the Spanish instruction that we're giving is going to lead to proficiency down the road if we're just having 45 minutes a day, 45 minutes a week. There's not that fluency, and and even at the middle school, you get half a year of Spanish and half a year of Latin. You have these breaks. So Principal Wilson, can you come up to the mic here? I'm going to give you a magic wand. Okay, what would you do to have a quality Spanish program, elementary through middle school? If you had your druthers, what change would you make to our district to make it happen?
I would extend the school day.
Bingo! So it comes down to time.
All right.
Principal Burkhead, come on down.
The price is right.
Where's your costume?
So, Bill, what do you think's required to have quality language learning? Doesn't matter what grade level. What do you need to have in place?
More time,
What else?
extended day.
I think it's more time, but I think, let's see. When did you learn the most French?
When I lived in Paris for a year in college.
Okay. It was an immersion experience. And it's that immersion piece that is hugely important. 45 minutes a day, 45 minutes a week isn't giving that immersion bit that Dr. Millen was kind of getting at with when you look at high-quality Spanish programs that are happening at elementary schools, there's lots more time than what we're doing. We could have Spanish at the elementary level. I'd love to see it. Well, we need, something needs to give. I had Kat Schmitz, was chatting with me, just asking me about this dilemma that we have. And I said, at the end of the day, I want to make sure whatever we do well. And the challenge is 45 minutes a day, 45 minutes a week for Spanish isn't enough. 45 minutes a day would be great. If we could do that K through 12, I think we'd see great proficiency outcomes. We just don't have that time. We could have that time, and here's where it gets in. We could, realize, Principal Wilson's, great suggestion. Well, let's extend the day. But keep in mind, we started this meeting with, we just ratified a teacher's contract. To extend the day means we're extending the day by 45 minutes. That's roughly 10-12% increase in the time we're expecting teachers to be there. It doesn't happen for free. So we could imagine then the budget presentation, if we are having to pay our teachers or have our staffing costs increase by 10% or so, how's that going to impact the budget? It's all of these things get interrelated. It's not that easy. So from where I sit, I do think that if we take an approach, that integrated approach with STEM, I do think we can do that very well at the elementary school. And that's not taking away from where I think, how I think we could do Spanish well. It's just at the end of the day, there's a finite amount of time. And it's how can we do things really well in the finite amount of time we have. Thank you, Bill. You can go home now.
Sharon?
A couple of things. One is, I don't think there's a question about science. I think for me personally, it came up as a surprise that we needed to do more in science. But when I think about it, I do understand we're making lots of changes. I think that most of this, for me, isn't about Spanish. It's about the standards. And I think the standards have changed drastically in what's been expected. And there's more and more and more being expected. And so I do think that I have a huge concern that I don't know where we're going to go with all this, because we're taking some of the beloved things out of library for other very good things, and we're taking, now we're proposing to do Spanish for science. But I don't know where this is going to go. I do actually agree with what you're saying about the longer day. It's, the selectmen and finance committee will hate that idea, but I don't know where. I do see for our community, we need to raise revenue because, and every other community. But I do have to say that I've gotten a whole lot of emails around this subject. Every year I usually get 2 emails, 3 emails maybe. So I don't know if there's any more creativity that can be done on this, but our community does matter. That is a huge thing. And I think we're feeling as a society less and less empowerment because more and more things are being dictated. So, I hope we can think more about that.
Anyone else?
Can I just ask one question? I think somebody, and I can't remember who said this, but it sounded to me like Spanish was being taught in several elementary schools across the Cape. I don't know, did I hear that from somebody? Oh, is that true? I don't.
I'm not going to assume
Okay,
that
I
the
just was
gentleman
curious.
was making it
Okay.
up, but I can't confirm that one way or the other, but
Okay.
I'm assuming it's true, yes.
All right, I was just curious.
I only have kids in the Brewster school system, they don't have it there, but.
So they don't have it, okay.
At that one school, but it sounds like in other schools in Nauset, they might. So.
Okay. And the other question, I'm just curious, I'm a French person, so are there any other languages at elementary schools on the Cape? I'm just kind of curious, because I was just looking at the high school, because I have had a son who graduated in 2017. My daughter's a junior. She's currently in the Honors French 4 as a junior, and my son took, I'm curious, just hypothetical, coming up through, let's just say we're having Spanish in elementary, we're having it at middle school. If somebody enters the high school and decides they want to do French or Mandarin, where do they start? I guess everybody has to come in at French 1, Latin 1, but are you noticing any difference between people coming in high school in Spanish 1 versus French 1? Am I making sense with this question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, again, I'm not sure we're going to get exactly at your question, but I know the high school teachers use I'm not going to get the name 100% right, but it's like there's a national proficiency exam for foreign language. So there's like one for Latin, one for French, one for Spanish. So they use that exam for students that think that they use it for kids who transfer in, plus kids coming up in the middle school that think that they're ready to take, the Spanish 2 or Latin 2. And so in recent history, only one student has passed an exam that allowed them to skip past level 1, and it was in Latin.
Okay.
And again, I want to be perfectly clear, it's not about the people, it's about the structure in which we're operating inside of. There's great teachers doing great work.
And why not French in elementary school, Tina?
Exactly.
Let's go there.
No, but I'm like Joe, I'm a lover of language, and I mean, this is hard. This is very, very hard because, my husband's English, so we've traveled the world and had all these experiences and cultures, and so I definitely understand. I absolutely hear that, and at the same time, I understand the science. I mean, this is hard. This is hard. And so, yeah, I'll be brainstorming as certainly every idea that comes to me, and you could attest to that, because every single
Gotten a few
idea.
emails.
I'm forever, how about this, how about this, how about this? And I will keep brainstorming, so I can, I can't guarantee any outcome, but I will continue to brainstorm. So that's what I will commit to doing.
Nancy?
I'm about to say that this is very hard because, I have a freshman in high school and a now fifth grader at the middle school, and both of them, my daughter was a part of the transition where she went from Spanish aerobics. God love Mrs. Armstrong doing Spanish aerobics at Chatham Elementary School into the weekly Spanish special, and my son went through the Spanish all through elementary school. So, and I see the benefits of it. For my daughter, it was actually the benefit of wanting to not take Spanish, but she's a lover of language, it's just not Spanish. And I see the benefits. I see the benefits cultural. I see that it's a great experience for the elementary school students to have a different type of learning experience in the school day other than reading math, science, and social studies, and a break from it. And again, it comes back to, it's been said a couple of times, where is the time going to come from? And I think that people may not realize that there is a schedule for elementary school. There is an elementary school schedule, not just a special schedule, but when they learn different things during the day, during each week. And I don't know where you could put Spanish in. It's a great idea to have, you can't put science in. It's a great idea to have volunteers come in, and I know that Chatham Elementary has those volunteers come in fairly regularly from Audubon and National Seashore, and that's part of their experience and what my children both experienced going through Chatham Elementary with science. And it's a game we play. It's choosing which direction we want to go in, and I agree with Tina in that. Where can we squeeze in more time? Where can we find, a little bit of time here and there to maybe keep some Spanish going on in the classrooms? Because I think that culturally it's important. And I also agree that why just Spanish? Maybe we do a month of French, a month of Mandarin, a month of Latin, a month of Spanish, a month of German, a month of, Japanese, and go through. And so that each month is a cultural experience for the students and not just the one Spanish culture, which I think Chatham Elementary, I think Robin mentioned, and I'm sure you guys do it at Harwich Elementary too. Sorry, I'm more familiar with Chatham. So it is very hard, and I've heard what people have said. I was at the forum last week and listening to the parents, and I've received emails, and I've actually received several in wanting to pursue the science in the elementary schools because there's parents that see that lacking as well. So I'll be done. Thank you.
Okay. All right. At this time, I think we'll move on with the agenda and go on with the MOA for Cranberry Valley and MRHS field maintenance.
So the last time we met, I had talked about we have requesting the committee to approve a memorandum of understanding or an intermunicipal agreement with the town to have Cranberry Valley take care of our front fields. They took on our front fields when the landscaping contractor during construction was sort of falling short of delivering fields that were going to be up to par. And I think there's a long history of the Harwich High School before we came together as a school district maintaining the fields out, I guess at the time, in back of Harwich High School. There was an immaculate field hockey field that this building's currently sitting on. that the golf course maintained and, created and maintained, and they've been creating, comparable fields out front here. So there's an intermunicipal agreement. Last time when we came here, there was not the financials for it, so on the back side of it, what's involved is there's a 2% increase on just on the staffing costs. Again, just as our contracts on the school side up by 2% for the fiscal year, on the town side, contracts, for their employees have gone up by 2%. So this is paying the labor side of the contract 2% more, but other than that, the expenses remain the same. So it's there's $38,760 of personnel costs to maintain the fields, and $44,000 in supplies, fertilizers, lime, the equipment to mow the fields are part of that. But again, it's Sean Hernandez, who's the superintendent at Cranberry Valley, has really done a nice job. There's pretty much one dedicated staff member comes over to deal with our fields during the growing season, and so it's not like we're diverting resources from the golf course. The golf course gets mowed, but there's a member of staff that comes over and also hits our fields.
So, do I have a motion to?
I was just going to ask, Scott, this also includes the replacement of 10 trees and some.
Yes, so you might
Shrubbery that's in the front.
have noticed as, while we focus on the grass fields, Sean Hernandez and his crew have been taking care of all the greenery, soup to nuts, outside of the building.
Needs a little love.
Yeah, so you might have noticed that a number of the trees that were initially planted died off. He has gone through and replaced 10 trees, and there's a schedule to replace other trees that, that don't look good. But, the nice thing about him coming around and doing it, as opposed to the landscaping contractor, he's actually watering, creating, putting a water source there for the trees so that, they will take root. He's also talked about, and I think we'll likely see this happen over the course of this coming growing season, but you might notice if you park in the front lot, there is some green shrubbery that doesn't grow very tall in the island in between visitors parking and the school building. When I spoke to Sean, he has a vision of just pulling that out and putting some drought-tolerant grasses and things that would actually look good, and has an idea on how he can go and put them in there, have them take root and be easier to maintain and not be quite the interesting
scrub brush.
Yeah, eyesore that the vegetation currently is.
How does that work financially?
That's included in this.
part of it?
That's down here in the some color and low-maintenance landscape plants and shrubs.
I think we're
Money, I
very
was
fortunate
wondering.
to be neighbors of Cranberry Valley, and Sean is a class act, and he is really committed as if it was part of the golf course.
Well,
So
and there's
we're very lucky.
He takes a lot of pride in this. He graduated from Harwich High. He's part of this community and wants to make sure that this facility shines just as much as the golf course.
Sharon?
Yes, I hear and agree with what you're saying about Sean and the Cranberry Valley. I just wanted to make sure that you're saying that this is not an increase in price of what we've done with the landscaping in the past.
It's the material side of it is the same as last year. There's just a 2% increase in the labor costs, which is what he, on the town side, is going to have to pay his guys, a 2% increase.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Jackie?
I'd move to approve the memorandum of agreement between Cranberry Valley and the Monomoy Regional High School field maintenance, the landscaping budget for 2020.
Do I have a second?
May I just clarify real quick?
Yeah.
Is it between Cranberry Valley or the town of Harwich?
Well, it's both.
So it doesn't matter which?
Yeah,
Okay.
Cranberry Valley is part of the town of Harwich.
Then I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Train contract extension?
Do you want
We have
to
it, well-
talk about that one, Katie?
Good evening, Katie Isernio, Business Manager. In 2016, we went out to bid for a contractor to do our rooftop, maintain and preventive maintenance on our rooftop units. And we have 2 one-year options on that 3-year contract. At the time, we got pricing from one vendor who would be $87,000, another $100,000, and the vendor that we currently have, which is Train, which would be $60,300. So what I'm asking is to approve just 1 year of the 2-year extension, and we'll see a year from now what we want to do.
Okay, do I have a motion for?
I move that we give a 1-year extension for Train.
Second.
We need more detail than that?
Oh, that's fine.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Maybe they should all be as quick.
I know, exactly.
Okay, approval of establishment of student activities accounts?
So one of the things with the student activity accounts is when we create new accounts, the school committee should approve the establishment of the new accounts for the student activities. And we have a writer's retreat that is having some activity that when the families give money, that we want to set it up in its own not revolving account, in a student activity account for the writer's retreat. For the most part, the money comes in, goes right out. And then we also have here at the high school a newly formed National Chinese Honor Society that they're collecting money for. And then what I would respectfully request is that we just do a blanket approval for a class of account for every incoming 8th grade, because we'll always need a class of 23, 24, 25, and rather than having to come and ask every year, if we could just make a generic class of student activity account.
Okay. Do those other things come, do all 3 of these come under, like the writer's retreat, or is that different?
So, no, there are 3 different ones that all come under student activities.
Got it, okay. All right.
Can I just ask a question? Could you explain what the National Chinese Honor Society is?
I don't know the details. We have the Chinese Mandarin class, and the teacher is requesting that, because the students are doing some activities around this, but I'm not 100% sure what it is,
So,
quite frankly.
Students that do well in Mandarin can be nominated by the teacher to be part of the Chinese, of the Chinese National Honor Society. So
Is there a criteria?
My son was one of them based on his
Good looks.
his Mandarin, which his father does not know any of.
Okay, so there's a criteria for this in this club or something. Okay, thank you.
Jackie?
I'll make a motion if you want one. I move to approve the establishment of the student activities accounts as follows: the Writers Retreat for the Monomoy Regional Middle School, National Chinese Honor Society for Monomoy Regional High School, and the class of for each new 8th grade classes, excuse me.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. And are there any subcommittee reports? All right.
Move on.
Superintendent's report?
Just 2 real quick things. I think one of the people that spoke was asking about just the responses. I know Mark, with regard to the Spanish and STEM, projected a pie chart. We also, in that survey that Mark had, was an area where people could go and say why they preferred one or the other, and most people said something. In fact, some people had a long narrative on why they felt one way or the other. And in fact, I think if you take all 200-some responses, there's 19 pages of prose on both sides. And I think that we've heard, we've heard very, and I mentioned this earlier, we've heard very loud voices at, particularly at the public forum last week. But the school committee and myself have gotten a large number of voices on the other side too. So, there are people that are very passionate on both sides of that. So I'll be sharing at our next meeting, with the committee, the responses that people have had. I just wanted to make sure that we had time to have Mark go through, and if they use the name of their child, that we redact, we redact things that are personal in nature, because the understanding was that the responses would be anonymous, not that we'd be saying, Terry Russell said this in the survey, but, so, and we...
And he doesn't even know my name.
Yeah. And then the last little thing, and this actually requires some action from the committee, and it's kind of hot and breaking, but last night, I was presenting our budget before the Chatham Selectmen, but also talking regional agreement with the Chatham Selectmen, and there was one question that was asked of me at that meeting. Meanwhile, Terry drew the short straw and went to the Harwich Selectmen's meeting to go talk regional agreement over there, because I couldn't be in two places at once. Thanks, Terry, for taking that one for Superintendent Jones. And
You're never going to live it down, you know that, right?
But the question that I was asked last night at the Chatham Selectmen's meeting, if you take the one that doesn't have color to it, the one with color is our red line copy, so the select board's got both. I put a little green asterisk on page 4. So on page 4, there was a question about section 5, letter C, and I think the recommendation from the board was that there would be a date put in there, and some of the language with regard to regionalization removed. I think when the comment was made, the person was looking at the redlined version, not this. So I don't think we need to do anything. We'll just clarify that, that you were looking at the redlined version, or the person that asked the question was looking at the redlined version, not this version. At the meeting that Terry was at, there was another comment that was raised with regard to page 8 of your non-redlined version, and I have bracketed and highlighted in green a section that I would recommend us taking out for clarity, because there's no intent in what we've put forth for the regional agreement to restructure how we're doing elementary schools in the two towns. And I think our legal counsel had added a section and it does exist in the red line version, that it's there but wasn't removed, that if the school district at some point in the future were to reorganize the elementary schools, here's how debt service would happen. Since that's not on the table, and I think there is confusion, does this mean that there's going to be a reorganization, that this section should just be cut out in its entirety, because we didn't change how elementary schools are operated earlier in the document. So I think that under this section, debt service number 2 should just simply read, debt service costs attributed to the district's elementary schools will be assessed to the member town that owns the building, period, end of story. I think that's the intent. So I guess what I would like to strongly recommend is that the committee vote to send this back and make sure that our legal counsel gives it the thumbs up redact this, send it back to the towns to be approved with that one clause removed, so that it doesn't create confusion at town meeting that doesn't need to be there. Because ultimately, the corrected version is just simply taking out things that had to do with regionalization that's behind us, not, there's just, it's to make the document read better and be clearer.
I would agree. I think that it's something that should have been taken back out because it was added in when we were talking about it, and it should have been removed when we went back to the original elementary school language in the regional agreement. And I think that it's okay that we vote on it tonight because this is definitely an unexpected action that we did not see coming to put on an agenda since it was brought up last night.
Yes. Well, I'm not at all prepared because I haven't thought about the implications of this. It's just sprung on me now. I don't know what for instance, just as a first thought, suppose Chatham Elementary School closed, then they repurposed that. So we'd be paying at the Harwich Elementary School for all of the, I guess Chatham pays for all of the middle school kids.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Nancy?
But I just haven't thought about this.
So we can't close Chatham Elementary School without changing the regional agreement. Basically, what Mr. Dr. Carpenter is recommending is that we go back to basically the original regional agreement language for that section.
When we changed the regional agreement last year to discuss about the school committee's role if we were to make an upper and lower elementary school, we added this because we needed it to make sense in this section. So if we take, and because that's not in the regional agreement anymore, because everything that happened last year, and so that's why we're still trying to approve the regional agreement now. All that was taken out, but this didn't get taken back out, and it should have. So this isn't any different than the regional agreement before. This is what we added because it pertains to what we were doing last year, which we are
I do
not.
understand that, but I just haven't had a chance to really process this.
And just to kind of answer the hypothetical, we can't close Chatham Elementary School because the regional agreement reads that there'll be an elementary school in each town. So this
Negates that.
says that if there's debt that needs, if you need to put a new roof on one building or the other, that you're financing as debt, that it's the town's building, they're responsible for that roof.
Okay. Let me just ask you this. At Chatham, the former Chatham High School, which is now our middle school, Chatham, that is owned by Chatham, and Chatham pays for that building. And no?
So when it comes to the middle school, this one sentence is only pertinent to the elementary school. There's elsewhere in how debt service operates that defines how the middle school is assessed. So debt service for number one, where you have children from both towns at the school, it says debt service costs attributed to the high school and the middle school will be assessed to the member towns using the 3-year rolling average of the town's foundation enrollment. So it's looking at the shared buildings as buildings that we look at, what percentage of Harwich kids are there versus Chatham kids, and the towns pay an equal share to deal with big ticket debt items. So if you had to replace the roof on the middle school, so last year when the storm came through, if it wasn't insurance that was fixing it, but if we had to go and replace that whole roof, the towns would pay for it based on the 73.45% Harwich and the remainder Chatham.
And that was in the original regional agreement as well, but number one.
So I'm still thinking, I know that the parents and many taxpayers in Chatham want to keep that open and have Chatham children there. I've been at those meetings. But I just don't know in the future if that will happen. But you're saying that Harwich and Chatham both have to vote in order for Chatham
More than that.
close that.
The process is, we have to vote, each selectman has, sorry,
And then the town meeting.
and then town meeting. So it has to go from us, we have to approve it, each board of selectmen has to approve it, it has to appear on a town meeting warrant and be approved at both town meetings for a change to the regional agreement to happen.
And I want to emphasize, there are no discussions to
No.
close Chatham
No.
Elementary School.
No, we're not.
None.
No.
Yeah, I know that. It's just, I think it's very, is there some reason we have to do this tonight?
Well, there's urgency to it because we need to get it approved by this committee so we can take it back to the select boards. They won't be meeting next week because of the holiday, but that following week, we need to have it in hand to, to see if Terry, draws the short straw again, or some other Harwich person. And then someone could go to Chatham. But we need to go back and take it to their board, because their boards then need to approve the revisions to the regional agreement and then agree to put it on the warrant so that it can be at town meetings, and we're running up against a timeline
we
on
won't have
getting
time to
things
push it
onto
off
each
again.
town's warrant.
And then we're going out another
So
year.
when is our,
28th.
This is it, we got to do it.
we have to do something tonight in order for it to go on the warrant? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Running out of
Yes.
calendar.
How much due to last evening when I was there, they put a placeholder knowing we would come back with an answer on that one item.
Okay.
Madam Chair, do we need a motion?
I'm waiting for a second on, didn't you make a motion?
No.
No, I just said that I'm okay doing it tonight because it was a unexpected
Okay,
agenda that we
sorry.
had no idea that we were going to be having to discuss today.
Okay. Do I have a motion to?
I'll make a motion. How's that?
Okay.
Please do.
I would like to make a motion to approve the regional agreement as presented with page 8, cutting out the section highlighted under debt service, section D, number 2, so that number 2 only reads, debt service costs attributable to the district's elementary schools will be assessed to will be assessed to the member town that owns the building, period.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm going to abstain. I just
Okay.
don't know which thing to do. And I know that this came up at the selectmen's meeting, and there's a time strain, but I'm really disturbed by how many times we're voting on things without it doing the due process of having to be posted, and then we discuss at one meeting, and then we vote the next meeting. So if we could go back to that, I just think things are slipping through and it's becoming, what we're normally doing is what we're not supposed to do unless an emergency happens.
Well, I think this is an exception. I wouldn't call it an
Yes,
emergency,
I-
but I think there's exceptions. I don't
Right.
think anything's really slipping through, and this is very easy, simple. I mean, this is just a paragraph that should have been taken out with the rest of the text. It was just an error of not deleting a paragraph.
Right, I'm really not speaking about this because this is caused by another whole group. It's just that, like field trips, and there are a whole slew of things that are coming through that we're coming up, we're like, okay, do we have enough information? Let's just vote for it tonight. Instead of, when Steve Duvall was on here, he was like adamant and kept it all in line. And I think it's, much more thought gets done if we have some time to think about it. That's all.
Comment on that one.
I'll entertain a motion to
Moment of
adjourn.
silence.
I move to adjourn.
Pardon?
I move to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're going to need an umbrella.
Is it turned already?
That's